Come over right now and pick up the old woman we ejected from our house because we want nothing to do with her. About a month after my father's funeral, Jackson called unexpectedly. He had kicked my mother out and demanded that I take care of her from now on. I was stunned, unable to immediately grasp the situation. Are you kidding? You didn't actually kick my mom out of the house. Come see for yourself, I exclaimed, bewildered. Oh, and I let her take Dad's memorial tablet, Jackson added casually. I was taken aback. Why would you do something so heartless? Mom's just a burden now that we can't get Dad's inheritance. I have no use for Mom, Jackson retorted callously. She's just a poor burden, isn't she? I was shocked. It turned out that my late father had left behind debts, and after settling them, there was no inheritance left. Worse still, Jackson and his wife had been living in the family home all this time. It was outrageous. It's getting dark soon. If you don't come to pick her up, Mom will be sleeping on the streets, Jackson warned. How could you be so cruel? I'll never forgive you for this, Jackson, I shouted, but he hung up without a word. Subsequent calls went unanswered. When I finally reached my mother, she confirmed everything Jackson had said. Angry and worried, I had no choice but to drive over to where she was. I am Lily, a 27-year-old woman in a hurry. 3 years ago, I married Mason, who is the same age as me, and we've been living together since. At the beginning of our marriage, we lived with my parents in the family home. But 2 years ago, Jackson and his wife abruptly moved in, claiming our presence made the place crowded. My older brother Jackson, 8 years my senior, has always been selfish, but his marriage seems to have amplified that trait. Our family home, where I was born and raised, is a spacious mansion inherited from my grandfather with extensive land. There should be no discomfort in living together. I was not satisfied with the situation and argued with Jackson, but my husband, who hates conflicts, urged us to leave. Around that time, my father was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, which had already significantly worsened. I wanted to spend his last moments with him, but that didn't happen. The disease consumed my father rapidly, and he passed away a month ago. My heart ached, knowing that my mother must be in much more pain than I was to have my own brother treat us this way amidst all the fresh sorrow. It was pitiful. What would happen next was truly shocking. An hour later, when we arrived at our family home, my mom was sitting desolate on a suitcase in the garden. The front door was locked. Jackson, she said, had taken her keys, using my set of keys. I opened the door and entered with my mom. Jackson and Olivia were sprawled on the sofa, nonchalantly watching TV. Is this some kind of joke? I demanded. How did you get in? I used my key to open the front door. Isn't it obvious? Jackson replied dismissively. Slipped my mind. Leave your key, take the old lady, and go. This isn't funny. How can you be watching TV after kicking your own mother out of the house? I retorted. Besides, if the house remained even after Dad's debts were paid off, Mom has a right to live here. Huh? What are you talking about? Jackson scoffed, infuriated by his dismissive attitude. I stood in front of the TV. Mom has a right to inherit this house. If you can't live with her, you should be the one to leave, I insisted. Shut up. This house is mine. Dad gave it to me when he was alive, Jackson snapped back. Don't act smart without knowing anything. What do you mean? There's no way Dad gave this house to you before he died, I countered. Mom also looked puzzled, shaking her head in disbelief. Jackson smirked and got up from the sofa, bringing out an envelope from a room in the back. Look at this. What's this? I asked, taking the envelope. Inside were documents proving the inheritance prepared by a judicial scribe, along with his real estate ownership certificate. He said that the property had been transferred to his name a month before Dad passed away, Jackson announced triumphantly. Mom and I were shocked as we looked at the documents. Why would Dad do something like this? I murmured, feeling a mix of confusion and betrayal. Asking a departed person didn't yield an answer. I sighed, looking at his picture. Why would Dad hand over the house to Jackson without discussing it with Mom? Jackson simply shrugged, a smug grin on his face. I'm his favorite, of course, Jackson boasted. I told him that Mom would take the house once he passed away, so he gave it to me while he was still alive. That can't be. I can't believe it. Open your eyes and face the reality, I exclaimed in disbelief. No matter how many times we checked the document, the property was in Jackson's name. All this just for a house, my mom muttered in disbelief. Is there no other inheritance? Nothing left for Mom. Be glad that the debts are cleared, Jackson retorted. This can't be real. You're not just worrying about Mom. You realize there's no inheritance for you either, right? The bank card he handed over contained only a few dollars. I wasn't after Dad's inheritance, but it was a shock to learn that he had left me nothing. This is too cruel, I muttered, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. To add insult to injury, Olivia was laughing heartily, seeing our dejection. Now get lost, you poor people. You have no business here, she sneered. Jackson and Olivia forcibly drove us out of the house. Ouch, that hurts, Mom cried out as she fell and scraped her palm when they pushed us out. Blood seeped from the wound as I wrapped her hand in my handkerchief. Tears of frustration welled up and fell. Seeing me like this, my mother gently wiped my tears, her eyes filled with sorrow as well. Mom, our place is small, but come stay with us. But I don't want to impose on Mason. I'll find somewhere else to stay, Mom protested. Don't worry, I just can't leave you like this. I'm going to call Mason right now. Just wait, I said, wiping my tears. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed my husband. From the other end of the line, I heard Mason's voice. Hello, Mason. I apologize for calling out of the blue, but my mom has been kicked out of her house, I explained to my surprised husband. He hummed in understanding, though he seemed a bit hesitant. I held my breath, waiting for Mason's response. Our apartment is pretty cramped compared to Mom's house. It might not be the most comfortable, I cautioned. Yeah, our place is tiny, but I don't mind. Bring your mom over. We've had times where we were taken care of at home too. In times of trouble, we should help each other out, Mason responded warmly. Thank you so much, I replied gratefully. My husband is a kind man with a big heart. He could never leave someone in need. Quickly, we took Mom to our apartment, and from that day on, we lived together. However, living with 3 people in our small apartment was certainly cramped. We didn't have enough savings to buy a house yet, but moving to a slightly larger place might be good. I feel bad for your mom in this small space, Mason admitted as we searched for properties on the computer. After a while, my mom's cell phone rang. She hung up and said something we never could have imagined. Why don't we live in my Highlands condominium? She suggested. Wait, what Highlands condominium? I asked, taken aback. My mother began to explain, much to our surprise. Apparently, my grandfather, who was a wealthy man, was quite a spendthrift and spent all the money he made in a day. In order to deal with his constant borrowing, my grandmother had no choice but to sell off their farmland to make ends meet. According to my mom, my father was also a big spender, but we didn't have any assets other than the house we lived in. So, I was really worried about our future. That's why I invested in real estate with the money. I was taken aback when my mom revealed that in addition to the Highland condominium, she was also managing an apartment building and had made a significant amount of money from her real estate investments. My husband and I were absolutely stunned. I can't even comprehend this. It's too amazing, I murmured. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Anyway, I just got a call from the management company that there's a vacancy in the Highland condominium. We can move in next month. What do you think? Mom asked. There was no reason to refuse such a generous offer, especially since the Highland condominium had 3 bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, located just a 5-minute walk from the station. It was much more comfortable than our current situation. Thank you, Mom, but we may only be able to pay as much rent as we are for the apartment, I said, feeling hesitant. You don't need to worry about that. We have to do this properly, even if we're family, Mom insisted. Oh, I need to tell the landlord that we're moving out. As we beamed with joy, time flew by as we busied ourselves preparing to move into our new home. Before we knew it, 2 months had passed and we were living in the Highland condominium. One day, as I was about to head out for some shopping, I was taken aback when the Jackson couple suddenly appeared in front of the condominium entrance. Why are you, a pauper, living in the Highland condominium? Did you hit the jackpot or something? They sneered. Of course not. Highlands condominium has always belonged to my mom, I replied calmly. Jackson and Olivia were both taken aback. What? They exclaimed in unison, looking at the towering condominium in disbelief. Their confused and goofy expressions were priceless, and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Jackson's face flushed red with anger. That wretched woman. I can't believe she was hiding this from us while pretending to be poor, he seethed. My mom never said she was poor. You just assumed it, Jackson. Plus, she inherited a large house. What's wrong with that? I retorted. That's not the point. Don't yell here. It's disrespectful to the other residents. Ignoring his outburst, I continued. Besides, how did you know I was here? Jackson said that when he couldn't reach my mother, he tracked her down using her mobile phone's location. Olivia explained. Why are you trying to contact Mom now after kicking her out? I bet it's something nasty again, I accused. Regardless, I insisted on seeing my mother. Let me in now. You must be joking. If you hurt Mom again, I couldn't bear it. If you have something to say, you can tell me, I added firmly. But the Jackson couple kept insisting on seeing my mother without revealing why. They seemed rather flustered. Weren't you living comfortably in your huge family house, just the two of you? I pressed. It's none of your business, Jackson snapped. Fine, if you don't want to tell me, that's okay. I have to go now. Bye, I said, trying to walk past them. Suddenly, Jackson grabbed my arm tightly. Ouch. Let me go, I exclaimed. Just call Mom, he demanded. Absolutely not. I'll call the police, I threatened. But Jackson scoffed at me. There's no way the police would come for a simple family argument. Even if they did, there's no way you could sue me for just grabbing your arm. I had to admit he had a point. Calling the police over something so minor might not only be futile but also disruptive to others. Feeling bad, I ended up not saying anything. Fine, I'll tell my mom, but only if you tell me why you're here. I relented. Jackson and Olivia hesitated before Jackson spoke up. The utility bills for that house are ridiculous. Just for the AC, the electric bill is $500. This is no joke. Their old traditional style house had more than 8 rooms, so it was no surprise that utility costs were high. But even so, a $500 electricity bill seemed a little steep, especially considering it was a particularly hot summer. I thought you would have known that from the start. How would we have known? Mom used to pay the bills. Jackson scratched his head frantically while Olivia fumed. Do you know the property tax for that house is $5,000 a year? Olivia added, exasperated. What? I can't believe you didn't know. Why would an old house like that cost so much? How are we supposed to pay that? Our house is old and has a large yard, so it's only natural that it would cost a lot to maintain, I pointed out. And you know, apparently it costs more in taxes to give away property while you're alive than after you pass away. This is going to be tough going forward. Wait, is that true? Jackson asked incredulously. Seeing the stunned expressions on the Jacksons' faces, I explained that this was all true information I had heard from my mom. The color drained from the Jacksons' faces. Olivia burst out in anger. It's your fault for not doing your homework. They started fighting right in front of me. After all the trouble we went through to get Dad to change the name on the house. This is too much, Jackson complained. That's what you get for doing something so underhanded, Olivia retorted. But even Dad said clearly that it would be better to give it to me than to your mom. I can't believe it, I muttered, shocked into silence as I realized that my father had disregarded my mom and me. Seizing the moment, Jackson made an outrageous request. You can have the house. Let's exchange it for this Highlands condominium, he proposed. What are you talking about? This isn't mine. It belongs to Mom. Please talk to Mom for me. I beg you. I promise to pass on your message. Nothing more, I pleaded. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Jackson snapped, his tone incredulous. Feeling ridiculous for even engaging with them, I gave up on shopping and started to head back into the Highlands condominium through the entrance. But the Jacksons tried to follow me, their audacity leaving me speechless. I'll sue you for trespassing, I threatened. You just told us that wouldn't be a legal issue, Olivia countered. It seemed like they wouldn't get the message until they suffered a real consequence. Exasperated, I called out to the management office next to the entrance. Excuse me, could you please call security? Someone who's not a resident of the Highlands condominium is trying to force their way in, I explained. The security guard, who was on standby 24/7, came running immediately. With the large security guard in front of them, the Jacksons were startled. I warned them once again to avoid the same thing happening in the future. I didn't call the police just now because you only grabbed my arm. But if you try to use force or enter the Highlands condominium again, I will really call the police, okay? I cautioned. We beg you, don't do that. If I even catch a glimpse of you, I'll report it. So go back to your mansion that you got from Dad. Got it? I added firmly. Apparently scared of the police, the Jacksons hastily retreated. I went back to my apartment and told my mother about the exchange with the Jacksons. But why did Dad let Jackson inherit the house? I wondered, feeling downcast. Mom smiled. Dad must have known what he was doing. When Dad let Jackson and her inherit the house, he didn't want to burden me or you, Lily. Even though Dad was indifferent about money, he cared for me a lot. Of course, he always said he loved you, Lily, so much. I was overjoyed to hear that my father felt that way about me. When my mom heard about the inheritance from Jackson, she muttered, "Are you going this far?" Because she realized that he had given a severe punishment to Jackson, who was always self-centered. "You knew how Dad felt, Mom?" I asked. "Of course, dear. We've been together for 38 years. I know what he's thinking without him saying a word. Besides, Jackson never took care of Dad when he was sick," Mom explained. I was under the impression that the Jacksons were looking after my father. However, it turns out they hardly ever visited him, not at home and barely in the hospital. When I visited my dad, he would often tell me, "Jackson comes to see me, and you have your job to attend to, Lily. There's no need for you to go out of your way." I took his words to heart, not realizing that it was a gentle lie meant to ease my worries. I had it all wrong about Dad. I feel awful. I want to apologize. "Don't fret, Lily. Your feelings are reaching Dad in heaven. The ones who should worry are the Jacksons. Who these days would buy a big, high-maintenance house like that? I bet they'll struggle to find a buyer," Mom reassured me. The truth in my mom's previously mischievous, gleeful words became evident after a while. The Jacksons, unable to maintain the house on their own, put it up for sale, but couldn't find a buyer. They continued to live in it even a year later. In the midst of all this, Olivia accidentally started a grease fire while cooking chicken in the house. It quickly burned down, and since they didn't have money for fire insurance, their life is going to get even tougher. "Well, while I understand their predicament, it doesn't concern me," I remarked. Apparently, the Jacksons are now camping out in the burned-down remains of their house. Living in the Highlands condominium is absolutely fantastic, and I can only feel gratitude toward my mother. I've been paying my mom rent every month, but it seems she's been saving it all to ensure we won't face hardship in the future. Every day is filled with peace and happiness as I live with my incredible mother and kind husband. As I visited my father's grave, I vowed to him that I would continue to repay my mother's kindness.
My name is Tasha, and 5 years ago, I married Tom, thinking we shared the same dreams and ambitions. We moved into my luxury apartment on the top floor of a high-rise building, with a view that took my breath away every time I looked out the window. I worked as the head of the financial department in a trading company, and my career was on a steep upward trajectory. Tom's mother, Linda, lived nearby and visited us often. From the beginning, she made it clear that she didn't approve of my career-oriented lifestyle. "A woman's place is in the home," she'd say, her lips pursed in disapproval. "You should be taking care of your husband, not gallivanting off to work every day." I tried to keep the peace, smiling and nodding when Linda went on her tirades about the duties of a good wife. But inside, I was seething. I had made it clear to Tom from the start that I wanted to build my career before settling down to have children. He had agreed then, but as time went on, I could see him wavering under his mother's influence. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Tom and Linda sitting at our dining table, heads close together in conversation. They fell silent as soon as I walked in, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Tasha," Tom said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I dropped my bag and sat down, my heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Linda spoke up first. "Tasha, dear, we're worried about you. All this work, it's not healthy. You're neglecting your home, your husband. When are you going to start thinking about having children?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Linda, Tom and I have discussed this. We agreed that we'd focus on our careers first, then think about starting a family." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Tasha, maybe it's time to reconsider. We're not getting any younger, and Mom's right. The apartment's a mess, and I'm tired of eating takeout every night." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tom, are you serious? We talked about this. You know how important my job is to me. More important than your family?" Linda interjected, her voice sharp. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. My job is how I'm building a future for our family. I thought you understood that, Tom. I stormed out of the room, locking myself in our bedroom. As I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of my troubles. Little did I know how right I was. The next morning, I left for work before Tom woke up. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let anyone, not even my husband, derail my ambitions. I had worked too hard to get where I was, and I wasn't about to give it all up now. I arrived at the office earlier than usual and stayed late into the night, determined to prove my worth. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. A few hours later, my secretary buzzed me. Mrs. Thompson, the president would like to see you in his office. My heart raced as I made my way to the top floor. Mr. Johnson, our company president, was known for his shrewd business acumen and his tendency to spring surprises on his employees. Tasha, come in, he said as I knocked on his door. Have a seat. I perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I've been watching your work closely, Mr. Johnson began, his face unreadable. And I must say, I'm impressed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you, sir. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. We're expanding, Tasha. Merging with a large company from another city. It's a big move, and we need our best people on it. My pulse quickened. Was this going where I thought it was? I'm planning to promote you, he continued. Head of a new department. But I won't lie to you, Tasha. It's going to be tough. You'll have to work harder than you've ever worked before. Are you up for it? I thought about Tom and Linda, about their expectations of me. Then I thought about all the late nights I'd spent poring over financial reports, the satisfaction I felt when a project came together perfectly. Absolutely, sir, I said firmly. And I accept. I won't let you down. As I left Mr. Johnson's office, I felt like I was walking on air. This was what I'd been working towards all these years. I couldn't wait to share the news with Tom. Surely, when he saw how successful I was becoming, he'd understand why my career was so important to me. On my way home, I stopped at our favorite restaurant and ordered all of Tom's favorite dishes. I picked up a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of roses. This was cause for celebration, and I was determined to make it special. I juggled the bags as I unlocked our apartment door. Tom? I called out. I'm home, and I've got a surprise. I found him in the living room, sprawled on the couch, the TV blaring. He barely looked up as I entered. Tom, you won't believe what happened today, I said, my excitement bubbling over. I'm getting promoted. Head of a new department. Isn't that amazing? Tom muted the TV and turned to face me, his expression far from the joy I'd expected. So, you'll be working even more now, is that it? I felt my smile falter. Well, yes, but think about what this means for us. We'll be able to afford that big house we've always talked about. Regular trips around the world. Our future is set. Tom stood up abruptly. Our future? What future, Tasha? You're never home as it is. When was the last time we had dinner together? When was the last time we even had a real conversation? I gestured helplessly at the bags I'd brought home. That's why I brought dinner. I thought we could celebrate. Celebrate what? Tom's voice rose. Celebrate you abandoning our marriage for your job? Celebrate the fact that I married a woman who cares more about her career than having a family? I felt tears pricking at my eyes. I thought you'd be happy for me, I whispered. Tom's face softened for a moment, then hardened again. I can't do this anymore, Tasha. Something has to change. With that, he stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by the trappings of the celebration that would never happen, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. As I mechanically put away the food and poured myself a glass of champagne, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the price of success? And if it was I willing to pay it? One evening, as I was leaving the office, I had an idea. I'd hire a housekeeper. Someone to clean the apartment and cook meals. It would solve Tom's complaints about the messy apartment and lack of home-cooked food. Satisfied with my solution, I made the necessary arrangements. 2 weeks later, I came home to find the apartment spotless, the air filled with the aroma of a home-cooked meal. I smiled to myself, certain that Tom would be pleased. I heard the front door open and close. "Tom?" I called out. "I'm home. And dinner's ready." He walked into the kitchen, his eyes darting around the clean space. "What's all this?" "I hired a housekeeper," I explained, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. "She cleans and cooks. I thought it would make things easier for both of us." Instead of the gratitude I expected, Tom's face clouded over. "So, this is your solution? Hire someone else to do your job?" "That's not fair," I protested. "I'm trying to find a balance." "Balance?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this? Tell me, Tasha, now that you've found a replacement for yourself in the kitchen, are you going to find a replacement for yourself in our bed too?" I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. "How dare you?" I hissed. "I've done nothing but try to make our life better, and this is how you react." Tom turned away. "I'm going out. Don't wait up." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the immaculate kitchen, the untouched dinner growing cold on the table. Over the next few days, Tom and I barely spoke. I buried myself in work, focusing on the upcoming merger. It was easier to deal with spreadsheets and financial projections than the mess my personal life had become. Then, one rare Saturday when I didn't have to go into the office, I decided to make an effort. I spent the morning cooking Tom's favorite meals, set the table with our best china, and even put on the dress he'd bought me for our last anniversary. When Tom came home, I was waiting with a smile. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Just the two of us." Tom looked at me for a long moment, then nodded silently. My heart leapt. Maybe this was the turning point we needed. I was just about to serve the appetizer when the doorbell rang. Confused, I went to answer it. There, standing in the hallway, was Linda. "Linda," I said, unable to keep the surprise out of my voice. "We weren't expecting you." "Oh, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "Tom, darling, there you are." I watched in dismay as my carefully planned romantic dinner turned into an impromptu family gathering. Linda dominated the conversation, peppering her small talk with not-so-subtle digs at my housekeeping and lack of maternal instincts. "You know," she said, helping herself to more wine, "in my day, a woman knew her place was in the home. We took pride in taking care of our husbands, raising our children." I stood up abruptly. "I think it's time for dessert," I said, fleeing to the kitchen. As I leaned against the counter, trying to regain my composure, I could hear Linda's voice drifting in from the dining room. "Tom, darling, you need to talk some sense into her. A woman's duty is to her family first. Everything else is secondary." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would be. I had a successful career, a beautiful home, but at what cost? As I listened to Linda's continued lecture on the virtues of traditional family values, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a terrible mistake somewhere along the way. One evening, I came home later than usual, my mind still buzzing with the day's meetings. As I opened the door to our apartment, I froze. There, scattered across the living room floor, were baby clothes. Tiny onesies, miniature socks, even a small pair of shoes. "Tom?" I called out, my voice wavering. "What's all this?" He emerged from the bedroom, a strange look on his face. "Oh, Mom brought those over. She thought it might help you get in the mood." I picked up a small t-shirt, my fingers trembling. In the mood for what, exactly? For starting a family, of course, Tom said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Tasha, we're not getting any younger. It's time we seriously considered having children. I spent the rest of the evening silently putting away the baby clothes, my mind in turmoil. Was I being selfish? Was my ambition destroying my marriage? The next morning, I woke up to find more baby items strategically placed around the apartment. A rattle on the coffee table, a baby book on my nightstand, a high chair in the kitchen. Linda's handiwork, no doubt. I tried to ignore them, but they seemed to multiply. Every day, there was something new. It was as if the apartment was slowly transforming into a nursery, whether I wanted it to or not. One night, I came home to find Linda sitting on our couch, flipping through a parenting magazine. "Linda," I said, unable to keep the irritation out of my voice. "I didn't know you were coming over." She looked up, a saccharine smile on her face. "Oh, Tasha, dear. I hope you don't mind. Tom said I could wait for him here. He's just popped out to get some groceries." I nodded stiffly, heading to the bedroom to change. When I came back out, Linda was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You know, Tasha," she said, not turning around. "A view like this is wasted on just two people. Imagine how lovely it would be to have a child toddle up to this window, their little hands pressed against the glass, eyes wide with wonder." I felt a headache coming on. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but Tom and I will decide when we're ready for children." She turned to face me, her eyes hard. "And when will that be, Tasha? When you've worked yourself into an early grave? When it's too late?" I opened my mouth to argue, but at that moment, Tom walked in, arms full of grocery bags. He looked between us, sensing the tension. "Everything okay here?" he asked cautiously. Linda's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, everything's fine, darling. I was just having a little chat with Tasha about family planning." Tom's eyes lit up. "Really? That's great. I knew you'd come around, Tasha." I felt cornered, outnumbered. I need some air," I mumbled, grabbing my coat and rushing out of the apartment. A few weeks later, I stumbled through the front door, exhausted from another long day at work. The sight that greeted me stopped me in my tracks. There, padding around our living room in fluffy pink pajamas, was Linda. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Tom emerged from the kitchen, a defiant look on his face. "I've decided that Mom is going to live with us. You're always at work, always away from home. I'm tired of being alone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You decided? Without even discussing it with me? When are you ever here to discuss anything?" Tom shot back. I turned to Linda, who was watching our exchange with a smug smile. "You can't stay here. This is my home." Tom's face darkened. "If you're not happy with this arrangement, you can get out." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me? I bought this apartment before we even got married. It's registered in my name. You can't kick me out of my own home." Linda stood up, her face twisted with anger. She took a threatening step towards me. "Now listen here, you ungrateful." I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't come any closer, Linda. If you lay a hand on me, I'll call the police." Linda's face crumpled. She collapsed onto the sofa, clutching her chest dramatically. "Oh, Tom," she wailed. "Did you hear that? She threatened to call the police on me." "Your own wife, threatening your mother? Oh, how she's hardened. That awful job of hers has turned her into a monster." Tom rushed to his mother's side, shooting me a venomous look. "How could you, Tasha? Your own mother-in-law." I couldn't take it anymore. Without another word, I stormed off to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind me. I spent a restless night tossing and turning, my mind racing with the absurdity of the situation. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Mr. Johnson, my boss. "Tasha, I need you on a plane today," he said without preamble. "We're ready to move forward with the merger." I need you in Chicago ASAP. I've never packed so quickly in my life. As I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, I was met with the stony faces of Tom and Linda. I have to go on a business trip, I said, my voice cold. It's for the merger. I'll be back soon. Tom's lip curled. Don't bother coming back at all. The flight to Chicago was a blur. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. The merger negotiations were intense, requiring all of my focus and energy. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone in my hotel room, the reality of my situation came crashing down. After a grueling week of negotiations and sleepless nights, I finally returned home. As I stood outside my apartment door, suitcases at my feet, I felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. I just wanted to collapse into my own bed and forget about the world for a while. I inserted my key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again. Nothing. A cold feeling of dread washed over me as I realized what must have happened. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. After a moment, it swung open. There stood Tom and Linda, both wearing casual house clothes, looking at me with a mixture of smugness and disdain. Why doesn't my key work? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom let out a harsh laugh. I changed the locks, he said, his eyes glinting with malice. You can come in if you're ready to choose your family over your precious career. I stood there, stunned. What are you talking about? Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. With a flourish, he presented them to me. Divorce papers, he said. It's time to choose, Tasha. Your career or your home. What's it going to be? I looked at Tom, really looked at him, and in that moment, I realized something profound. I didn't love him anymore. The man I had married was gone, replaced by this bitter, manipulative stranger. Linda's shrill voice cut through my thoughts. Well, we're waiting. Make your choice. I took a deep breath, straightening my spine. I choose my career, I said, my voice steady. Because I don't have a family or a husband. Not anymore. Tom's face twisted with anger, but he thrust a pen at me. With a steady hand, I signed the divorce papers right there in the hallway. As soon as I finished, Linda grabbed my arm and roughly pushed me towards the elevator. Good riddance, she spat, slamming the door behind me. I stood there, staring at the closed door of what used to be my home. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, bordering on hysterical. I had just been kicked out of my own apartment, the one I had bought with my hard-earned money. Too tired to make a scene, I gathered my suitcases and made my way to a nearby hotel. A few hours later, I received a call from my friend Rachel, a realtor I had worked with when buying the apartment. Tasha, hon, how are you doing? Rachel asked, concern evident in her voice. I've been better, I admitted. Why do you ask? Rachel hesitated. I've seen Tom's posts on social media. He's saying some pretty nasty things about you. My stomach dropped. What kind of things? He's calling you a soulless careerist who destroyed your family for the sake of your job. Says he sacrificed everything for your relationship and you just used him and tossed him aside. He's even talking about suing you for alimony. People are really sympathizing with him, Tasha. I felt a surge of anger. That's not what happened at all. I didn't think so, Rachel said. Want to tell me your side? I gave her a brief rundown of the events of the past week. When I finished, Rachel was quiet for a moment. Oh, Tasha, she finally said. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Listen, I'm going to set the record straight with our friends and colleagues. People need to know the truth. Thanks, Rachel, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. I really appreciate that. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Tom's lies, gratitude for Rachel's support, and a growing determination. Tom might have taken my home for now, but I wasn't going to let him take my reputation or my dignity. The vibration of my phone startled me out of my thoughts. Mr. Johnson's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach dropped. I took a deep breath and answered. "Tasha, we need to talk," Mr. Johnson said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I've heard some concerning things on social media." I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. "Sir, I can explain dash." "No need to explain, Tasha," he interrupted. "I want to hear your side of the story." Relief washed over me. I took a deep breath and launched into the whole sordid tale: the arguments, Linda moving in, being locked out of my own apartment, and Tom's social media smear campaign. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, to my surprise, Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Tasha, do you really think I'd believe that nonsense your ex is spouting?" he said. "I know you. I've seen your dedication, your work ethic. Don't let this affect your confidence. You have every right to defend yourself, and I want you to know that the company stands behind you." Tears of relief pricked at my eyes. "Thank you, sir. You don't know how much that means to me." A couple of days later, my phone pinged with a social media notification. Tom was doing a live broadcast from my apartment. Curious, I tapped on the video. There was Tom, grinning at the camera, surrounded by a film crew. "Hey everyone! Exciting news, we're about to start a major renovation on our apartment. The crew from Extreme Makeover, Home Edition will be here in 2 weeks to transform this place." I stared at the screen, a plan forming in my mind. Instead of anger, I felt a sense of calm determination. I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel's number. "It's Tasha. I need a huge favor," I said the moment she answered. "I need you to sell my apartment. Fast. Like, within 2 weeks fast." Rachel let out a low whistle. "That's a tall order, Tasha. What's the rush?" I quickly explained about Tom's renovation plans. "I need new owners in there before that film crew arrives." "But Tasha, how am I supposed to show the apartment? Tom changed the locks, remember? I sent her the most recent photos I had of the place. These will have to do." "I know it's not ideal, but..." Rachel cut me off with a laugh. "Oh, honey, you underestimate me. I've got a couple who've been looking for exactly this kind of place in this area. They trust my judgment. With these photos and the reputation of the building, I think I can make this happen." 2 weeks flew by in a blur of work and anticipation. Before I knew it, the day of the big renovation reveal had arrived. I sat in my hotel room, laptop open, watching the live stream with bated breath. The camera panned across my former apartment, now filled with an excited film crew and construction workers. Tom and Linda stood in the center, beaming at the cameras. "We're so excited to start this renovation," Tom was saying, his arm around Linda's shoulders. "It's time for a fresh start, a new chapter in our lives." Just as the host was about to give the signal to start demolition, there was a commotion off camera. The door burst open, and in walked a smartly dressed couple, followed by a familiar face, Rachel. "I'm sorry, but you can't renovate this apartment," the man said, holding up a stack of papers. "It belongs to us now." The camera swung wildly as confusion erupted. Tom's face went from shock to anger. "What are you talking about? This is my home." Rachel stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Actually, Tom, this apartment belonged to your ex-wife, Tasha. She sold it to this lovely couple 2 weeks ago. Your signature on the renovation documents is a forgery." The host of the show turned to Tom, his face livid. "You forged documents? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Tom and Linda's faces turned a deep shade of red as the host continued to berate them on live television. The scandal unfolded in real time, with millions of viewers watching as Tom's lies came crashing down around him. I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. It was over. I had won. With the proceeds from the sale of the apartment, I made a bold move. I bought a charming little house in the city where our company had just completed its merger. It felt poetic, somehow a new home in the city where my career was taking off. To my delight, Mr. Johnson appointed me as the head of our newly acquired company. It was a challenge, but one I was more than ready for. Weeks later, I found myself face to face with Tom again, this time in a courtroom. He had the audacity to demand half of the proceeds from the apartment sale, plus alimony. I watched with satisfaction as the judge denied his claims, citing his attempt to unlawfully seize my property and the forged documents. As we left the courthouse, Tom approached me, his earlier bravado replaced by desperation. "Tasha, please," he begged. "I'm sorry for everything. Can't we start over? Give our marriage another chance?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of freedom. I laughed, not unkindly, but with finality. "No, Tom," I said, shaking my head. "We can't start over. But I can start anew, and that's exactly what I'm doing." As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. My career was soaring, I was leading a successful merger, respected by my peers and superiors alike. I had a beautiful new home, one that was truly mine. I'm Lydia, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down. But let's start from the beginning. I grew up in a wealthy family, the only child of doting parents who gave me everything I could ever want. My father, Robert, was a successful businessman, and my mother, Eleanor, was a socialite who threw the best parties in town. They showered me with love and attention, making sure I never lacked anything. When I entered college, I was determined to make my parents proud. I buried myself in books, focusing solely on my studies. That's when Tom entered my life. Tom was persistent, I'll give him that. He'd wait for me after classes, bring me coffee during late-night study sessions, and even showed up at my parents' house one day. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he said, standing tall in our living room, "I'm in love with your daughter, and I want you to know my intentions are serious." My father was impressed. He'd always wanted a son, someone to take under his wing and groom for the business world. Tom seemed to fit the bill perfectly. "Lydia," my father said to me later that evening, "why don't you give this young man a chance? He seems like a good catch." Reluctantly, I agreed to go on a date with Tom. To my surprise, I found myself enjoying his company. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Our relationship blossomed quickly. Before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle, fresh out of college. My parents were overjoyed, especially my father, who saw Tom as the son he never had. "Welcome to the family, son," my father said, clapping Tom on the back at our wedding reception. "I have big plans for us." True to his word, my father helped Tom start his own business, a state-of-the-art car wash. He bought all the necessary equipment and even helped us purchase a small, cozy house. A year into our marriage, I gave birth to our son, Michael. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love I had never experienced before. I threw myself into motherhood, becoming a full-time housewife. My days were filled with diaper changes, feeding schedules, and lullabies. As the years rolled by, our lives settled into a routine. Michael grew from a gurgling baby into a curious toddler, then a mischievous child, and finally a brooding teenager. I poured my heart and soul into raising him, while Tom continued to struggle with the car wash business. "Your father thinks I'm a failure," Tom spat one evening after another tense phone call. "He's always looking down on me, giving me handouts like I'm some charity case." I tried to reassure him. "That's not true, Tom. Dad's just trying to help." These arguments became more frequent, and I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home. Michael, now in his late teens, began to withdraw, spending more time in his room or out with friends. As for me, well, the years of stress and housework had taken their toll. I was no longer the slim college girl Tom had wooed. My once toned body had softened, and I'd gained weight. Tom didn't hesitate to point this out. "You've really let yourself go, Lydia," he'd say, eyeing me with disappointment. "What happened to that pretty girl I married?" His words stung, but I tried to brush them off. I told myself he was just stressed about work, that he didn't really mean it. but deep down, I knew our marriage was crumbling. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a sunny Tuesday when I received the call that would shatter my world. "Mrs. Thompson," a somber voice said. "I'm afraid there's been an accident. Your parents, they were in a small plane crash in Hawaii. I'm so sorry, but they didn't survive." The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. Tom was surprisingly absent during this time, leaving me to handle everything on my own. When he was around, he seemed almost cheerful. "We need to sort out the inheritance," he said, barely a week after the funeral. "Have you spoken to the lawyer yet?" I was shocked by his insensitivity. "Tom, I'm still grieving. Can't this wait?" He shrugged. "Business doesn't wait, Lydia. We need to know where we stand financially." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with the family lawyer, Mr. Jacobson. As we sat in his plush office, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Thompson, your parents' will is unusual. It's divided into 2 parts. I can only reveal the first part now. The second part will be disclosed in exactly 1 year." Tom leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Well, what does the first part say?" Mr. Jacobson adjusted his glasses. "Your parents have left their mansion to your future grandchildren, with their guardians as trustees until they come of age." I was stunned. "But Michael is our only child, and he's not even married yet." As if on cue, Michael, who had insisted on coming to the meeting, let out a low whistle. "Wow, that opens up some interesting possibilities, doesn't it?" I turned to look at my son, confused by his reaction, but he avoided my gaze. Tom, on the other hand, was fuming. "That's it?" he demanded. "What about the rest of their assets? The businesses? The money?" Mr. Jacobson shook his head. "I'm afraid that information is in the second part of the will, which cannot be revealed for another year." As we left the lawyer's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Tom was uncharacteristically quiet, while Michael seemed lost in thought. Just a few weeks after the reading of the will, Michael dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. "Mom, Dad," he announced one evening at dinner, "I have someone I want you to meet." The next day, he brought home a young woman named Sarah. She was pretty, with long blonde hair and a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is my wife," Michael said, his arm around her waist. "And she's pregnant with our child." I nearly choked on my tea. "Wife? Pregnant? But when did all this happen?" Michael shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "We'd been dating for a while. When we found out about the baby, we decided to get married right away." I couldn't help but notice how his eyes flickered to Tom, who was nodding approvingly. Something about this whole situation felt off, but I pushed my doubts aside. After all, I was going to be a grandmother. "Well, congratulations," I said, trying to muster up some enthusiasm. "This is quite a surprise." Sarah's smile widened. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm so excited to be part of your family." From that day on, our household dynamics shifted dramatically. Sarah moved in, citing the need to be close to family during her pregnancy. At first, I was thrilled to have a female companion in the house. However, it quickly became apparent that Sarah had her own agenda. She began to subtly undermine me at every turn. When I'd cook dinner, she'd wrinkle her nose and say, "Oh, is that how you make it?" I always thought it was done differently. But it was her interactions with Tom that really set off alarm bells. She'd laugh at his jokes, touch his arm, and shower him with compliments. "You're such a talented businessman, Tom," she'd coo. "I don't know how you manage it all." Tom, predictably, lapped up the attention. He began spending more time at home, but not with me. He'd sit for hours, talking business with Sarah while I was relegated to the background. I tried to talk to Michael about Sarah's behavior, but he brushed off my concerns. "Mom, you're just being paranoid," he'd say. "Sarah's great. Maybe you're just jealous because you're not the center of attention anymore." His words hurt more than he could know. Had I raised a son who cared so little for his mother's feelings? As for Tom, he seemed to revel in the new family dynamic. He'd beam with pride when Sarah complimented him, and I'd catch him looking at me with something akin to disgust. One day, while out grocery shopping, I ran into an old college friend, Jessica. We decided to catch up over coffee, and as we reminisced about our college days, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Remember that guy who was always chasing rich girls?" Jessica asked. "What was his name? Tom something?" My heart skipped a beat. "Tom? Tom who?" Jessica laughed. "Oh, you know, that sleazy guy who tried to date every girl with wealthy parents. He ended up marrying some naive rich girl, if I remember correctly." As Jessica continued talking, describing Tom's behavior in college, I felt like I was going to be sick. The Tom she was describing sounded exactly like my husband. Had our entire marriage been based on a lie? With a heavy heart and shaking hands, I pulled into our driveway. The house loomed before me, no longer the cozy home I once loved, but a stage for the drama that was about to unfold. I found Tom in his study, poring over some papers. He barely looked up when I entered. "Tom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "What is it now, Lydia?" I took a deep breath. "I ran into Jessica today. You remember her from college, right?" A flicker of something, was it fear? Passed across his face before he schooled his features into indifference. "Vaguely. What about her?" "She told me about a guy in college. A guy who pursued rich girls, looking for an easy meal ticket." I paused, watching his reaction. "Sound familiar, Tom?" For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, to my shock, he started laughing. Well, he chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Took you long enough to figure it out, didn't it?" His cavalier attitude stunned me. "So it's true? You married me for my parents' money?" Tom shrugged, not a hint of remorse in his eyes. "Of course I did. Look, Lydia. I never loved you. I tolerated you because you were my meal ticket. But now? Now you're just a fat, useless burden." His words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, tears welling in my eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" I whispered. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Because, my dear wife, I don't need you anymore. Your parents are dead, and soon, their fortune will be mine. Or rather, our grandson's, which amounts to the same thing." Suddenly, everything clicked into place: Michael's hasty marriage, Sarah's convenient pregnancy, the way they'd been treating me. It had all been a calculated move to secure my parents' inheritance. You planned all this?" I gasped. Tom laughed again, the sound grating on my nerves. "Give credit where it's due. It was mostly Michael's idea. The boy's got a good head for business, unlike his mother." I felt like I was drowning, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. "Does Sarah know about this?" "Of course she does," Tom sneered. "She's a smart girl, knows a good opportunity when she sees one. Unlike you, she'll make a proper wife for a businessman." I couldn't take any more. I turned and fled from the room, my world shattered around me. As the reality of my situation sank in, I realized I had nowhere to go. I had no money of my own, not even enough to rent an apartment. With a heavy heart, I resigned myself to staying in the house with people I could no longer trust. 2 months later, Tom dropped another bombshell on me. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he strode in with a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Pack your bags, Lydia," he announced without preamble. "We're moving into your parents' house." I nearly dropped the knife I was holding. "What? When did we decide this?" Tom's laugh was cold and mocking. "We didn't decide anything. I decided. We're moving in with Michael and Sarah. After all, our grandson is the heir to that house." Each word was like a slap to my face. "What do you mean? What about our house?" "Oh, that?" Tom waved dismissively. I sold it. The money's already been spent on things for people I actually care about. And just so we're clear, you're not on that list. Over the next few days, I watched in stunned silence as Tom, Michael, and Sarah excitedly prepared for the move. They bought new cars, splurged on expensive clothes and gadgets, all while I faded into the background, ignored and forgotten. The move to my parents' house was like a twisted parody of a happy family relocation. Sarah immediately claimed the master bedroom, while I was relegated to a small guest room in the back of the house. As the days passed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Sarah gave birth to my grandson and began delegating all the housework to me. I cooked, cleaned, and even cared for my grandson while she lounged about, issuing orders like a queen. "Lydia," she'd call out. "The baby needs changing. And while you're at it, could you tidy up the living room? It's looking a bit messy." I threw myself into caring for my grandson, finding solace in his innocent smiles and gurgles. But even that joy was tainted by the constant barbs and criticism from Sarah and Tom. One evening, about a month after we'd moved in, things came to a head. We were all seated at the dinner table, a dinner I had prepared, as usual. Sarah was in rare form, ordering me about as if I were a servant. "Lydia, fetch me some more water. And hurry up with clearing these plates. We don't have all night." Something in me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. "Enough," I shouted, slamming my hands on the table. "I am not your maid, Sarah. This is my parents' house, and I deserve some respect." The room fell silent. Sarah's face crumpled, and she burst into dramatic tears. "How could you speak to me like that? After all we've done for you?" Tom stood up, his face red with anger. "That's it, Lydia. I've had enough of your ingratitude. Pack your things and get out. This house belongs to our grandson now, and you're no longer welcome here." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you these. Divorce papers, already signed. I want you gone by morning." I looked to Michael, hoping against hope that my son would defend me. But he just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I'm an adult now, Mom. I don't need you anymore." With shaking hands, I took the divorce papers. Sarah's triumphant smirk was the last thing I saw as I turned and walked out of the dining room, my world crumbling around me. With nowhere to go and my world in shambles, I found myself dialing a familiar number. Jessica, my old college friend, answered on the second ring. "Lydia? Is everything okay?" Her voice was laced with concern. I swallowed hard. "Not really. I need a place to stay." Without hesitation, Jessica invited me to her home. As I settled into her guest room, she shared her own family drama. "My son's been going through hell," she confided. "His fiancée left him, and she's pregnant. He's desperate to find her and be there for his child." My heart skipped a beat. "Do you have a picture of her?" Jessica nodded, pulling out her phone. As she showed me the photo, my blood ran cold. Staring back at me was Sarah, my supposed daughter-in-law. "Jessica," I said slowly, "I think I know where your son's fiancée is." Over cups of tea, I poured out my story. Jessica listened, her expression morphing from shock to anger to determination. "We need to expose them," she declared. "All of them." Together, we hatched a plan. The next day, I returned to my parents' house under the guise of collecting the last of my belongings. While there, I managed to snag a few strands of my grandson's hair for a DNA test. The wait for the results was agonizing, but when they finally came, they confirmed our suspicions. My son was not the father of Sarah's baby. Jessica's son was. As I grappled with how to break this news to Michael and Tom, my phone rang. It was Mr. Jacobson, my parents' lawyer. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "it's time to review the second part of your parents' will. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" The next day, I sat in Mr. Jacobson's plush office, my heart pounding. As he read the will, I could hardly believe my ears. To our beloved daughter, Lydia, he read, "We leave our luxury apartment, valued at $500,000. But that wasn't all. My parents had foreseen everything. In the event of a divorce, all their property, including Tom's business, would come to me. Your father wants you to know," Mr. Jacobson continued, "that he's been the one financing Tom's business all along. He registered it in his own name. In case of divorce, it's yours to do with as you please." I sat there, stunned. All this time, I thought I had nothing, when in reality, I had everything. "What about the house Tom and I lived in?" I asked, remembering he had sold it. Mr. Jacobson smiled. "That's the only thing Tom can claim. Everything else is yours." As the reality of my new situation sank in, I couldn't help but laugh. Tom had thought he was so clever, but in the end, he had outsmarted himself. I stepped into my new apartment and gasped. The space was breathtaking, all sleek lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and tasteful, expensive furnishings. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home. As I was exploring my new sanctuary, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he said without preamble, "it's been a year since the first part of the will was read. We need to know what's in the second part." His tone was demanding, entitled. "I'm sure Grandpa and Grandma left everything to me, right?" I couldn't help but chuckle inwardly at his presumption. "Michael, this isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. Why don't you, Sarah, and your father come over tomorrow morning? I'll text you the address." After hanging up, I called Jessica. "It's time," I told her. "Can you come over tomorrow morning? We're going to settle this once and for all." The next day, I heard the doorbell ring. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find Tom, Michael, Sarah, and the baby standing there. Their jaws dropped as they took in the luxurious surroundings. Michael whistled. "Wow, Mom. This place is amazing. I can't wait to move in." Sarah's eyes gleamed with greed. "Yes, it'll be so nice, once we get rid of all this old lady decor. And of course, once we get rid of you, Lydia." I raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't be so hasty if I were you. Please, come in and have a seat." As they settled onto the plush sofa, I excused myself for a moment. When I returned, I wasn't alone. Jessica stood beside me, her presence causing Sarah to pale visibly. "Before we discuss the will," I said, my voice steady, "there's someone I'd like you all to meet. This is my friend, Jessica." Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. Michael and Tom just looked confused. "Now," I continued, "I think it's time we all had a frank discussion. There are some truths that need to be revealed." I paused, savoring the moment. All night, I had rehearsed what I was about to say. The words I had practiced, the revelations I was about to make, would change everything. As I looked at the faces of those who had betrayed me, my ex-husband, my son, and the woman who had tried to steal my life, I felt a surge of righteous anger mixed with anticipation. As Jessica got closer, Tom's eyes widened with recognition. A smirk spread across his face as he let out a bitter laugh. Well, he sneered, gesturing towards me. "Looks like I achieved my goal after all. Married a rich fool, didn't I?" His words stung, but I held my ground. "We'll address your betrayal later, Tom. Right now, there's something more pressing to discuss." I turned to Sarah, who was visibly squirming. "We know the truth about you, Sarah." Michael looked confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. Sarah was looking for a rich husband. When she heard about the will from you, Michael, she saw an opportunity. She decided to pass off someone else's child as your own, to get her hands on your grandparents' estate. Jessica stepped forward, her voice steady. "The baby isn't Michael's. It's my son's child." The room fell silent. Then, I produced the DNA test results. Sarah's face drained of color as realization dawned. In a flurry of movement, Sarah grabbed her bag. "I don't need this. I don't need a beggar's child," she shouted as she fled the apartment. Michael stood there, shell-shocked, the baby still in his arms. He looked lost, pathetic even. Tom, recovering from the initial shock, asked in a small voice, "So, who gets this apartment?" I couldn't help but smile. "Well, Tom, let me enlighten you about the second part of my parents' will." I explained everything, the apartment, the car wash, all of it. Tom's face fell with each revelation. Suddenly, Tom was on his knees. "Lydia, please, I'm sorry. Forgive me. We can work this out." I looked at him coldly. "Get out, Tom. You have 2 days to leave my parents' house, or I'm calling the police." As Tom scrambled to his feet, he turned to Michael. "Son, give me the car I bought you. I need something." Michael's response was curt. "No. It's mine. You're not getting anything from me." With one last desperate look, Tom slunk out of the apartment. I then turned to Michael, who stood there, head bowed in shame. Jessica gently took the baby from his arms. "Michael," I said, my voice firm but not unkind, "since it turns out I don't have any grandchildren, there are no other heirs to your grandparents' home besides me. I need you to move out as well." He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. I'll go pack my things." With that, he too left the apartment. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long breath. The apartment was quiet now, save for the soft coos of the baby in Jessica's arms. I looked at my old friend, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. "Well," I said, managing a small smile, "that didn't go quite how I expected when I woke up this morning." Jessica nodded, bouncing the baby gently. "You did what you had to do, Lydia. They left you no choice." As I sank onto the plush sofa, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly free. Free from deception, free from manipulation, and free to live life on my own terms. The months following the confrontation flew by in a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. I found myself settling into my luxurious apartment, the space becoming a sanctuary of peace and new beginnings. One of my first decisions was to rent out my parents' house. It felt right, somehow, to have the property occupied by a young family who appreciated its warmth and history. The rental income provided a comfortable cushion, adding to the proceeds from selling Tom's car wash business. My friendship with Jessica blossomed. We'd meet for coffee, sharing stories, and supporting each other through the ups and downs of our new realities. And then there was little Tommy, Jessica's grandson, the child I had once believed to be my own. Despite the painful circumstances of his birth, I found myself developing a deep affection for the boy. "He has your eyes," Jessica would joke during our visits, and we'd laugh, finding humor in the absurdity of our intertwined lives. My relationship with Michael was a work in progress. The betrayal had cut deep, but he was still my son, and I couldn't bring myself to sever that bond completely. Our interactions were tentative at first, awkward phone calls, and stilted meetings in neutral coffee shops. But slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. As for Tom, he became a ghost in my past. I heard through the grapevine that he'd fallen on hard times, his grandiose dreams of wealth and status crumbling in the wake of his exposed deceit. I saw him only once, by chance, as I was driving through town. He was working at a small kiosk, looking older and wearier than I remembered. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt a flicker of something, not love or longing, but a kind of closure. Then the light changed, and I drove on, leaving that chapter of my life firmly in the rearview mirror. I'm Carla, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my family. It wasn't always obvious, but looking back, the signs were there from the start. My younger sister Sarah burst into the world like a supernova, all golden curls and dimpled smiles. From day one, she had our parents wrapped around her little finger. Me? I was the quiet one, more interested in my chemistry set than in making friends. I still remember my 10th birthday. I'd been hoping for a new microscope, dropping hints for weeks. Instead, I got a frilly dress that made me look like a cupcake. "But Mom, I hate dresses," I protested. "Nonsense, you'll look just like Sarah," she beamed, completely missing the point. As we grew older, the divide only widened. Sarah breezed through school on charm and good looks, while I buried myself in books and science experiments. "Did you hear? Sarah's been nominated for prom queen." Mom gushed over dinner one night. "That's great," I mumbled, trying to muster some enthusiasm. I won first place in the science fair today." "Oh, that's nice, dear," Dad said absently, already turning back to Sarah. "So, Princess, have you picked out your dress yet?" And so it went, year after year. My achievements, no matter how significant, were always overshadowed by Sarah's latest triumph, no matter how trivial. The state science fair in my senior year was my moment to shine. I'd spent months perfecting my project on sustainable biofuels. When they announced the winners, I could hardly believe my ears. "First place goes to Carla Johnson." I was ecstatic. Finally, something even my parents couldn't ignore. Or so I thought. "That's great, honey," Mom said distractedly when I told her the news. "But we can't make it to the awards ceremony. Sarah has a dance recital that day, and you know how important that is to her." I watched them fuss over Sarah's costume and makeup, my trophy gathering dust on a shelf. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one I was getting used to. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could barely contain my excitement. Full scholarship to a prestigious university? It was more than I'd dared to hope for. "Mom, Dad, I got in." I burst into the living room, waving the letter. "Full ride and everything." Mom glanced up from her magazine. "That's nice, dear." "Sarah, didn't you say you needed help picking out a prom dress?" Just like that, my big moment was brushed aside. Again. "But, it's a full scholarship," I tried again, my voice smaller this time. Dad patted my shoulder absently. "Good job, kiddo. Sarah, Princess, let's go shopping. Can't have you showing up to prom in just anything, can we?" I watched them pile into the car, my acceptance letter crumpled in my fist. It was a familiar feeling, but it still stung. Despite the lack of fanfare from my family, I packed my bags and headed off to college with high hopes. For the first time, I was free from Sarah's shadow, free to be just Carla. College was a revelation. Suddenly, my passion for science wasn't weird or nerdy, it was respected, even admired. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, Sarah followed the path our parents had always dreamed of. She enrolled in the local community college, more interested in parties than classes. "College is so hard," she whined during one of our rare phone calls. "I don't know how you do it, Carla." I bit back the urge to point out that maybe if she spent less time partying and more time studying, she might find it easier. Instead, I just mumbled some vague encouragement and changed the subject. It was during my sophomore year that Sarah dropped her bombshell. "I'm engaged," she squealed over the phone. "Mike proposed last night. Isn't it romantic?" Mike. Her high school sweetheart. The guy who'd once asked me if science was like, really hard and stuff. "That's great, Sarah," I managed, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. "Have you set a date?" "We're thinking right after graduation," she gushed. "Oh, Carla, it's going to be perfect. You'll be my maid of honor, won't you?" The wedding was exactly as you'd expect. Sarah was radiant, Mike looked uncomfortable in his tux, and I stood there in my frilly pink nightmare, pasting on a smile for the photos. "Isn't this perfect?" Mom whispered to me during the reception. "This is what every mother dreams of for her daughter." I wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for me, but I held my tongue. It was Sarah's day, after all. As I threw myself into my studies and later my career, Sarah's life seemed to follow a script straight out of our parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. "I'm going to be a grandmother," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Carla, isn't it wonderful?" I murmured my congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. "When are you going to settle down, Carla? When will you give us grandchildren?" Emma arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. I flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over my new niece and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from my parents. "You know, Carla," Dad said, bouncing Emma on his knee, "you're not getting any younger. Don't you want this for yourself?" I gritted my teeth. "I'm focused on my career right now, Dad." Mom clucked her tongue. "Career is all well and good, dear, but family is what really matters." I bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about my career before. Instead, I plastered on a smile and changed the subject. 2 years later, Liam joined the family. Once again, I played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about my own lack of family. Meanwhile, I was making strides in my career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by 30, I was a senior researcher. My parents' response to this news? A distracted "that's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Emma and Liam. It was around this time that I decided to buy a house. I'd saved carefully, living frugally while my colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. When I finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, I was over the moon. "Mom, Dad, I bought a house," I announced during our next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house?" Mom repeated. "All by yourself?" "Yes, all by myself," I said, my excitement deflating a little. "It's a great investment, and—" "But it's such a big house for one person," Mom interrupted. "What will you do with all that space?" I sighed. "I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine." "Well," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, "I suppose if that's what you want." "Oh, did I tell you? Emma lost her first tooth yesterday." And just like that, we were back to talking about Sarah and her kids. The months following my house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new home. I threw myself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of my personality. It was during this time that I started to feel a shift in my family dynamics. The usual calls from my parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. One evening, I received a call from my mother. "Carla, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "we're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." I agreed, my suspicions raised. In my family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. The night of the dinner arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Sarah's car was already in the driveway, and I could hear the excited shrieks of Emma and Liam from inside. Dinner was a tense affair. My parents kept exchanging glances, and Sarah seemed unusually quiet. Mike, Sarah's husband, kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Finally, as we were finishing dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Carla, we need to talk about something important." Here it comes, I thought. "What's up, Dad?" He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie, we've been thinking. That big house of yours, it's really too much for just one person." I felt my hackles rise. "Dad, we've been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. My mother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say is that Sarah and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped." I looked at Sarah, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. "Okay, and?" "And we think," my mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, "that since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Sarah and her family. Just give them the keys and move out." For a moment, I was speechless. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to yell, "Gotcha," and reveal it was all a joke. But all I saw were expectant faces. "You can't be serious," I finally managed. "Now, Carla," my mother said, her tone patronizing. "Don't be selfish. Sarah needs her own space more than you do." "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice rising. "How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself?" "It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need," my father chimed in. I turned to Sarah, who was still avoiding my gaze. "And what do you have to say about this?" She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. "Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family, asking me to give up my home, acting like I was the unreasonable one for refusing. "No," I said firmly, standing up. "Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house." As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard my father call out, "Think about it, Carla. Family should come first." The days following that disastrous family dinner were a blur of disbelief and anger. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, unable to believe my family's audacity. How could they even think to ask such a thing? My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah, but I ignored them all. On the third day, as I was trying to focus on work, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Figuring it wasn't family, I answered. "Hello, is this Carla?" A woman's voice came through, sounding disapproving. "Yes, who's this?" "This is your Aunt Mildred." "I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Aunt Mildred, that's not—" "In my day," she continued, not letting me get a word in, "family helped family. We didn't hoard our resources like misers." "I'm not hoarding anything," I snapped. "It's my house. I bought it with my own money." "Well," she huffed, "if you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway." I was so shocked, I nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said primly. "You're not getting any younger, you know. Tick-tock." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what I should do with my house and my life. My great-aunt Edna left a voicemail. "Carla dear, it's your great-aunt Edna. I just wanted to say, it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you'd need that big house." It was relentless. Every ping of my phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to dread checking my phone, wincing every time it buzzed. I threw myself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid going home to more messages. It was during one of these late nights at work that I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold, but enough that my boss insisted I take a few days off to recover. So there I was, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. My phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it. A noise at my front door. Like someone was fumbling with the lock. My heart started racing. Was someone trying to break in? I got up as quietly as I could, creeping towards the door. Through the window, I could see figures on my porch. Familiar figures. I yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. "What the hell are you doing?" There, caught red-handed, were my parents and Sarah. They looked like deer caught in headlights, frozen in the act of trying to break into my home. My mother was the first to recover. "Carla, dear, we were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. My father at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work. And that makes it okay?" I was practically shouting now. What were you planning to do? Move Sarah in while I was gone? Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Carla, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home. I noticed for the first time that there was a car parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of their plan. You were going to move in, I said, my voice flat. You were actually going to move into my house without my permission. Now, Carla, my mother started, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. We've discussed this. Sarah needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative. You thought wrong, I cut her off. This is my house, mine. I bought it with my own money, money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it. Just then, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were peering out their window, clearly concerned by the commotion. Mr. Johnson caught my eye and held up his phone, mouthing, "Police?" I nodded, grateful for their concern. Turning back to my family, I said, "I've called the police. You need to leave. Now." "You wouldn't," my father scoffed. "Your own family?" As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. My family's faces paled. The police car pulled up, and 2 officers got out. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, eyeing the scene warily. I took a deep breath. "Yes, officer. These people were attempting to break into my home." "Carla," my mother gasped. "How could you?" The officers looked at my family. "Is this true?" My father started to stammer out an explanation, but the officer held up a hand. "Sir, attempting to enter a property without the owner's permission is a serious offense. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." As the officers escorted my family off my property, I stood in the doorway, shaking. I couldn't believe it had come to this. "You'll regret this, Carla," Sarah called over her shoulder as they were leaving. "You'll end up old and alone." I slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against it. Tears started to flow freely now, a mix of anger, hurt, and relief. My phone had fallen silent. No more calls from distant relatives, no more guilt-tripping messages. It was as if I'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the connection, dysfunctional as it had been. It was in this tumultuous state that I received an unexpected message. It was from my Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd had a falling out with my mom over some old family drama. "I'll meet you tomorrow at Café Bleu at 1400 hours." Intrigued and desperate for any ally, I agreed to meet her. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Aunt Maggie in a cozy corner of Café Bleu. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Carla," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me, trying to get me on her side. But there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me." My curiosity piqued, I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Aunt Maggie took a deep breath. "Your parents and Sarah, they're in serious financial trouble. Sarah and Mike have been living beyond their means for years. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit." I shook my head in disbelief. "But why? How?" "It's worse than that," Aunt Maggie continued. "Mike has a gambling problem. A bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years." The pieces started to fall into place. The desperate attempt to get my house, the constant pressure. "But what about Mom and Dad?" I asked. Aunt Maggie's face grew grim. "They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They'd been barely keeping their heads above water. They were planning to move in with Sarah and Mike as soon as they got your house." I sat back, stunned. "How do you know all this?" "I work at the bank where they all have accounts," Aunt Maggie explained. "I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family. My mind was reeling. All this time, while I'd been working hard and saving, my family had been digging themselves into a hole. And they'd tried to drag me down with them. Carla, Aunt Maggie said gently, I know this is a lot to take in. But I think it's time we did something about this situation. If you're willing, I have an idea. Armed with the information Aunt Maggie had shared, we decided to dig deeper. We hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Diana who came highly recommended. For weeks, we waited anxiously as Diana worked her magic. Finally, she called us in for a meeting. What she revealed left us speechless. Mike, Sarah's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than my cousin Jenny, Uncle Bob's daughter. He's been funneling money to her for months, Diana explained, showing U.S. bank statements and hotel receipts. Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it. But where did he get the money? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Diana's face grew grim. From his gambling wins, and from your parents. Aunt Maggie and I exchanged shocked glances. The betrayal ran deeper than we'd imagined. We decided to host a family gathering at my house. The irony wasn't lost on me, the very house they had tried to take from me would be the stage for their undoing. The day of the gathering arrived. I watched as my family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They probably thought I was going to cave to their demands. Once everyone was seated, I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know, I began. I laid out everything, the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from their faces. Sarah jumped up, tears streaming down her face. It's not true, she screamed, before collapsing into sobs. Mike, tell them it's not true. But Mike was already halfway to the door. Uncle Bob, his face contorted with rage, caught him by the collar. You son of, he growled. That's my daughter you've been fooling around with. My parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of their exposed financial ruin seemingly more devastating than the fact that they had tried to steal my house. The relatives who had judged me so harshly began to stammer out apologies. We had no idea, Aunt Mildred muttered. Carla, we're so sorry. As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. In the weeks that followed, our family was turned upside down. Sarah, unable to forgive Mike's infidelity, filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with our parents. But their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house. They were forced to downsize to a small, rented apartment, all 5 of them crammed into a space smaller than my living room. As for me, I watched it all unfold from a distance. After much soul-searching and several tearful nights, I made the difficult decision to sever all ties with my immediate family. You're doing the right thing, Carla, Aunt Maggie assured me one afternoon over coffee. It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being. Aunt Maggie had become my rock, the family I chose when my blood relatives had let me down. Our weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of my new life. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new routine. Without the constant drama and demands of my family, I had time to focus on myself. But with that came a startling realization: I was lonely. You know, Aunt Maggie said one day, there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new? With her encouragement, I decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside my comfort zone, but as I strapped on the harness for the first time, I felt a thrill of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. That's where I met Alex. He was belaying another climber, his strong hands confidently handling the rope. When he turned and flashed me a warm smile, I felt my heart skip a beat. First time? He asked, noticing my nervous fidgeting with the equipment. Is it that obvious? I laughed. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easygoing nature. As we talked, I learned he was a wildlife photographer, with a passion for capturing the beauty of nature. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement about the possibility of a relationship. Alex was kind, adventurous, and understood the complexities of family dynamics in a way few others could. We began dating, our shared love for nature and understanding of complex family dynamics bringing us closer. Before I knew it, we were discussing marriage, a concept that once seemed foreign and unattainable to me. Through it all, Aunt Maggie remained my steadfast support. She became the mother figure I had always yearned for, but never had. "Carla," she said to me one day, her eyes misty. "I want you to know something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you." As I hugged her, tears streaming down my face, I marveled at how much my life had changed. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. With Aunt Maggie's love, Alex's support, and my newfound strength, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. My name's Caroline, and I've been married to Mike for 5 years now. I work as a chef at a local restaurant, and I absolutely love it. Cooking's been my passion since I was a kid, and I've always dreamed of becoming a famous chef someday. Mike works as a sales manager for a small company. Our life together was pretty good, for the most part. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we managed to make it work. The only real thorn in my side was Mike's mother, Linda. She's a social worker, specializing in child safety assessments for the local administration. And let me tell you, she's a piece of work. From day one, Linda made it clear she didn't like me. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. She'd always find something to criticize, whether it was my cooking, my appearance, or just the way I breathed. It was exhausting. The worst part was that Mike never stood up for me. He'd just sit there, silent, while his mother tore me apart. One day, I decided to confront Mike about his relationship with his mother. We were sitting in our living room after dinner, the TV droning on in the background. "Mike," I started, trying to keep my voice calm, "don't you think your mom's a bit harsh sometimes?" Mike's face hardened. "Look, Caroline, you don't understand. Mom's always been like this. She raised me and my brother on her own after Dad left. She had to be tough. But..." He cut me off. "She used to tell us that if we misbehaved, she'd give us away to other parents. It scared the hell out of us, but it worked. We learned to behave." I stared at him, shocked. That's terrible, Mike. You know that's not normal, right?" He shrugged. "It's just how things were. Mom did her best." I realized then that this was a battle I couldn't win. Mike was too deeply under his mother's influence. Years of manipulation and fear had left their mark. As if dealing with Linda wasn't bad enough, there was also the constant comparison to Sarah, my sister-in-law. Sarah was married to Mike's older brother, Tom. In Linda's eyes, Sarah could do no wrong. She was the perfect daughter-in-law, smart, talented, beautiful, and well-mannered. Everything I apparently wasn't. "Oh, Caroline," Linda would say during our family dinners, "did you hear about Sarah's latest achievement at work? She got another promotion. Isn't that wonderful?" I'd nod and smile, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. "That's great, Sarah. Congratulations." Sarah would beam, basking in the praise. "Thank you, Caroline. It's not much, really." But the worst part of these dinners wasn't the comparisons. It was the constant badgering about children. Linda was obsessed with the idea of grandchildren, and she made it her mission to remind me of my duty at every opportunity. "So, Caroline," she'd start, her eyes narrowing, "when are you and Mike planning on starting a family? You're not getting any younger, you know." I'd take a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "We're focusing on our careers right now, Linda. Children will come when we're ready." Linda would scoff. "Career? Cooking isn't a career, dear. It's a hobby. A real woman knows her place is in the home, raising children." I'd feel my blood boil, but I'd bite my tongue. Getting into an argument wouldn't change anything. Mike, as usual, would stay silent, pushing food around his plate. Interestingly, Linda never bothered Sarah about having children. I found out why one day when Mike let it slip that Tom was infertile. It was a family secret, one that Linda guarded fiercely. She'd rather have no grandchildren than admit her precious firstborn had any flaws. Over time, Linda tightened her grip on her sons, insisting they help her with everything. And of course, that expectation extended to the daughters-in-law as well. Tom and Sarah lived nearby, so it was easier for them to cater to Linda's whims. But Mike and I lived further away and both worked late hours. We couldn't visit as often as Linda wanted, and boy, did she let us know how unhappy she was about it. "I might as well be dead for all you two care," she'd say dramatically over the phone. My own son and his wife, too busy to visit their poor, widowed mother. I'd roll my eyes, mouthing the words along with her. I'd heard this speech so many times I could recite it in my sleep. "We're sorry, Linda," I'd say, not feeling sorry at all. "We'll try to visit more often." But it was never enough. In Linda's world, we should be at her beck and call 24/7. And of course, it was all my fault. I was the one bossing Mike around and keeping him from his familial duties. As the months went by, I threw myself into my work even more. The kitchen became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt truly valued and respected. Chef Paolo continued to mentor me, pushing me to expand my skills and creativity. "You have a gift, Caroline," he'd say, tasting my latest creation. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words were a balm to my battered self-esteem. In the kitchen, I wasn't the disappointing daughter-in-law or the wife who couldn't give her husband children. I was just Caroline, the talented chef with a bright future ahead of her. The day everything started to unravel began like any other. I was at work, up to my elbows in prep for the dinner rush, when my phone buzzed. It was Linda. I groaned internally, but answered anyway. "Hello, Linda. What can I do for you?" Her voice came through, sharp and demanding. "Caroline, I need you to come to the mall and pick me up. Sarah and I have been shopping, and we have too many bags for a taxi." I glanced at the clock. It was peak traffic time, and the mall was on the other side of town. "Linda, I'm at work. I can't just leave." "Oh, so your job is more important than family?" she interrupted. "I see how it is. I suppose I'll just have to struggle with all these bags myself. At my age, I could throw my back out, but don't you worry about that." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Fine, Linda. I'll be there as soon as I can." The traffic was a nightmare. I sat in gridlock for over an hour, my frustration mounting with each passing minute. By the time I finally reached the mall, I was a ball of stress and irritation. I circled the parking lot, looking for Linda and Sarah. They were nowhere to be seen. I called Linda's phone. No answer. I tried Sarah. Nothing. Finally, after my third attempt, Linda picked up. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "Oh, Caroline," Linda said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We got tired of waiting, so we took a taxi home. I thought Sarah texted you." Before I could protest, she hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone in disbelief. Then I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, letting out all the frustration and anger I'd been bottling up for years. When I got home, Mike was already there. I stormed in, still seething from the day's events. "Your mother," I started, but Mike cut me off. I know. Mom told me what happened." "Why didn't you get there faster?" "She had to take a taxi, because of you." I stared at him, mouth agape. "Are you kidding me right now? I left work early, sat in traffic for hours, and it's my fault?" Mike shrugged. "You know how Mom is with waiting. You should have planned better." The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and tense silences at home. Mike and I were barely speaking, the rift between us growing wider with each passing day. Then, one evening as I was closing up the kitchen, my phone rang. It was Linda again. I considered ignoring it, but I knew that would only lead to more drama. With a heavy sigh, I answered. "Hello, Linda." "Caroline, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I need you to do me a favor. It's Sarah's birthday tomorrow. I'm throwing her a little party at my house. I need you to deliver food from your restaurant. The most expensive dishes, mind you. For 10 people. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Linda, that's going to be extremely expensive. I can't just—" "Oh, don't be so stingy," she interrupted. "It's for family. And of course, you'll be paying for it. Consider it your gift to Sarah." I nearly dropped the phone. "You want me to pay for a gourmet meal for 10 people? Linda, that's insane. I can't afford that." She sked disapprovingly. "Well, if you're going to be difficult about it, I suppose you could always cook the meal yourself and bring it over. That's what a real chef would do, isn't it?" I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Linda, I work full-time. I don't have the energy to cook a gourmet meal for 10 people after a full shift." "I see," she said, her voice cold. "Well, I'll let Mike know how little you care about his family. Goodbye, Caroline." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. When I got home, Mike was waiting for me, his face like a thundercloud. "Mom called," he said without preamble. "Why are you being so difficult about Sarah's birthday? Mom's right, you don't care about anyone but yourself." In the end, I caved. I couldn't face another argument, another night of cold silence. The next day, I placed the order at the restaurant, wincing as I handed over my credit card. It was a huge chunk of my savings, but what choice did I have? The following evening, Mike and I arrived at Linda's house for the party. I was exhausted from a long day at work, but I plastered on a smile as we entered. Linda greeted us at the door, all smiles for Mike and barely a glance for me. "Oh, you're here. Come in, come in. Everyone's already started eating." We walked into the dining room, and I stopped short. The table was laden with food, but it wasn't the dishes I had ordered from the restaurant. Instead, there was an array of homemade dishes that looked, well, less than appetizing. "What's going on?" I asked, confused. "Where's the food from the restaurant?" Sarah looked up from her plate, smirking. "Oh, didn't Mom tell you? I decided I wanted to cook for my own birthday. Isn't that right, Mom?" Linda nodded, beaming at Sarah. "Yes, and everything is just delicious. Sarah's such a talented cook." I stood there, speechless. Mike nudged me. "Come on, let's sit down. Don't make a scene." Numbly, I took my seat. Mike chatted and laughed with everyone, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort. I caught Linda watching me several times, a satisfied smirk on her face. By the time we left, I was emotionally drained. In the car on the way home, I turned to Mike. "Did you know about this? That Sarah was going to cook?" He shrugged. "Mom might have mentioned it. What's the big deal?" I stared at him in disbelief. "The big deal is that I spent a fortune on food that's now going to waste, Mike. And your mother knew that when she asked me to order it." "You're overreacting," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. "It was just a misunderstanding." But I knew better. This was no misunderstanding. It was a calculated move by Linda, another in her endless series of power plays. And once again, I was the loser. A couple of months passed, and the tension in our household had become almost unbearable. Mike and I were barely speaking, and when we did, it usually ended in an argument. I was spending more and more time at the restaurant, throwing myself into my work with a kind of desperate energy. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a long shift, Mike approached me with an unusually excited expression on his face. "Caroline," he said, his eyes bright, "I need your help with something important." I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. "What is it?" It's Mom's birthday next month, he explained, and I want to do something really special for her. Something that'll blow Tom's gift out of the water. Got any ideas? I was about to shake my head when suddenly a thought struck me. I remembered overhearing Chef Paolo talking about an upcoming event at the restaurant. Actually, I said slowly, I might have an idea. On your mom's birthday, there's going to be a special event at the restaurant. They're filming an episode of that cooking show your mom loves. You know, the one with that presenter she's always going on about? Mike's eyes widened. No way. Are you serious? I nodded, feeling a small spark of excitement despite myself. Yeah, we could book a table for that night. If we're lucky, we might even get to be part of the filming. It's happening in the next room over from the main dining area. Mike's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Caroline, that's perfect. Mom would absolutely love that. She's always wanted to meet that presenter. For a moment, I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. It was nice to see Mike so happy, and for once, to be the source of that happiness. We should keep it a surprise, I suggested, getting caught up in the moment. Can you imagine her face when she realizes where she is and what's happening? Mike nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. We'll keep it completely under wraps. She won't suspect a thing. We spent the next hour planning out the details. I would book the table and arrange everything at the restaurant. Mike would handle getting Linda there without spoiling the surprise. The next day, I spoke to Chef Paolo about booking the table and explained the situation. He was more than happy to help, even offering to put us at one of the best tables in the house. The day of Linda's birthday arrived, and I woke up feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. As I was getting ready, Mike approached me with an odd expression on his face. Hey, I think I'll go pick up Mom myself, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Why don't you head to the restaurant on your own? I'll meet you there with Mom. I frowned, a little taken aback. Oh, okay. What time should I arrive? Just stick to the reservation time, Mike said quickly. I'll handle everything else. I noticed Mike leaving much earlier than necessary, but I brushed it off. Maybe he had some last-minute preparations to take care of. When I arrived at the restaurant at the appointed time, my heart sank. Through the window, I could see that the dining room was already full. Our family and several guests were seated at the largest table, laughing and talking animatedly. They looked like they'd been there for quite some time. I entered, my steps faltering as I approached the table. My usual place next to Mike was occupied by one of Linda's friends. I stood there, feeling like a ghost at my own party. Hello, everyone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They barely glanced at me, continuing their conversations as if I weren't there. The only one who acknowledged me was Linda, who gave me a smug smile before turning back to her guests. I turned to Mike, confusion and hurt swirling inside me. What's going on? I thought we were surprising your mother together. Mike finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. Caroline, we're tired of all the drama. Mom's birthday should be a happy occasion, without any arguments or tension. We thought it would be better this way. I felt like I'd been slapped. Better? You mean, better without me? Before Mike could respond, Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Oh, Caroline, dear. Didn't Mike tell you? We decided to have a little family gathering. Just the people who really matter. I felt my face burning with humiliation. That's when I noticed the camera crew in the corner, filming the whole scene. Linda, oblivious to their presence, continued her tirade. You know, it's probably for the best that you haven't given Mike any children, she said loudly. A barren, useless woman like you shouldn't be a mother. If you ever do manage to have a child, I'll make sure it's taken away and given to Sarah. She'd be a much better mother. Sarah, Mike's sister-in-law, giggled as Linda patted her head approvingly. Linda was on a roll now, playing to her audience. You should see some of the cases I deal with at work. Women like Caroline, thinking they can have it all, a career and a family. Ha! I take their children away and give them to real families, families with proper values. The guests nodded and murmured in agreement, shooting me mocking looks. I stood there, frozen, as Linda continued to spew her venom. I felt a deep sense of shame, not for myself, but for this woman who could be so cruel, so callous. "I'm not hungry," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Enjoy your dinner." As I turned to leave, I heard Linda's laughter, followed by the laughter of her guests. The sound followed me out of the restaurant, echoing in my ears like a twisted symphony. I arrived home, my mind still reeling from the events at the restaurant. Without thinking, I started pulling clothes from the closet, stuffing them haphazardly into a suitcase. I couldn't stay here anymore, not after what had just happened. As I was frantically packing, my phone rang. It was James, the restaurant administrator. I almost didn't answer, but something in me made me pick up. "Caroline," James's voice was urgent. "You need to check the social media page for that cooking show that was filming at the restaurant today. Now." Curiosity overcame my desire to flee. I opened my laptop and found the page. What I saw made my jaw drop. There, front and center, was a video of Linda. But it wasn't the polished, put-together Linda she usually presented to the world. This was Linda in all her ugly glory, spewing venom about me, about how she abused her position to take children from their mothers. The video had hundreds of thousands of views already, and the comments section was on fire. She should be fired immediately. How can someone so cruel work with children? Poor Caroline, having to deal with such a monster of a mother-in-law. Before I knew what I was doing, I was in my car, driving back to the restaurant. I burst through the doors, my heart pounding. Linda was still there, chatting animatedly with the show's presenter. When she saw me, her face twisted with annoyance. "Why are you back?" she hissed. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough for one night?" Without a word, I thrust my phone in front of her face, the damning video playing on the screen. Linda's face drained of color as she watched herself, her own words, condemning her. What is this?" she sputtered. Then, turning to the presenter, she shrieked. "You! Take this down immediately. I'll sue you for everything you've got." The presenter just laughed. "I could take it down, sure. But it's already been shared thousands of times. You're viral, Linda. Congratulations on your newfound fame." Linda's face contorted with rage. She began grabbing plates off the table, hurling them to the floor. "I'll ruin you," she screamed. "I'll ruin all of you." "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you," the presenter said calmly. "We're still live, you see. Your little tantrum is being broadcast to the whole country right now." Linda froze, her face a mask of horror. The other guests at the table sat in stunned silence, looking as if they wanted the ground to open up and swallow them. James appeared at my side, his face grim. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave," he said firmly. "Now. Or I'll be forced to call the police." As Linda and her entourage disappeared into the night, the presenter turned to me, a sympathetic smile on his face. "Caroline, isn't it?" he said. "Would you mind if we had a quick chat on camera? I think our viewers would love to hear your side of the story." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As the camera turned to me, I took a deep breath. This was my chance to tell my truth, to reclaim my narrative. The aftermath of Linda's public meltdown was swift and merciless. Within days, she was fired from her job in disgrace, her years of manipulating the system finally catching up with her. The influential position she'd wielded like a weapon was gone, along with the respect she'd commanded in society. As for me, I wasted no time. The very next day, I filed for divorce. Mike came to me, his eyes red and pleading, begging for forgiveness. "Caroline, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake. We can work this out, I promise. I'll stand up to Mom, I'll be better." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and resolve. "It's too late, Mike. You had years to stand up for me, to be a real partner. But you chose your mother over me every single time. The divorce was surprisingly quick. We didn't have much to divide, and Mike, perhaps out of guilt, didn't contest anything. Just like that, 5 years of marriage were dissolved, reduced to nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper. But as one chapter of my life closed, another one opened up in ways I never could have imagined. Chef Paolo approached me a week after the incident. "Caroline," he said, a broad smile on his face, "I've got some news for you. The owner was impressed with how you handled everything. We want to make you the head chef of our restaurant in the city center." It wasn't just the promotion. TV shows started calling, wanting me as a guest. At first, they just wanted me to cook, but soon they were asking me to speak about my experiences, about self-respect and the importance of love in family relationships. I started a YouTube channel, sharing recipes and life advice. The comments section was filled with messages from people who had been through similar experiences, thanking me for giving them the courage to stand up for themselves. One day, my agent, yes, I had an agent now, called with exciting news. "Caroline, I've got multiple offers for you to host your own TV show on cable. Are you interested?" I couldn't believe it. Me, with my own TV show? It was beyond anything I'd ever dreamed of. As for my former family, well, I heard things through the grapevine. Linda's influence over her sons was waning. Sarah, my former sister-in-law, who had always been Linda's golden child, now openly despised her mother-in-law. Funny how quickly things change when the true nature of a person is revealed. Some people asked if I felt sorry for them, if I regretted how things had turned out. The truth is, I didn't. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. The difference was, I could look myself in the mirror each morning and be proud of the person I saw. My name is Gina, and this is the story of how my life fell apart and then came back together. I'm 35 years old, and until recently, I thought I had it all figured out. I was the sales director at a large company, married to my college sweetheart, Mark, and we had just bought our first house. After graduation, I landed an entry-level job at a promising startup. I worked my way up the ladder, putting in long hours and sacrificing weekends. It paid off when I was promoted to sales director last year. Mark, on the other hand, had a harder time finding his footing. He bounced between a few jobs before settling as a shift supervisor at a mirror manufacturing company. Our best friends were another couple, Lisa and Tom. We met them at a neighborhood barbecue shortly after moving into our new house. Lisa was a stay-at-home wife, always impeccably dressed and with a spotless home. Tom was a successful entrepreneur who seemed to work as much as I did. When we bought our house, I was the one who qualified for the mortgage. I put it in my name and assumed all the responsibility for the payments. I didn't mind at the time, I was making good money, and I figured Mark would contribute when he could. As time went on, I noticed Mark becoming more and more dissatisfied with his job. He'd come home complaining about his boss, saying things like, "He's always on my case about everything. I can't do anything right," in his eyes. I tried to be supportive. "What happened this time?" I'd ask, setting aside whatever work I'd brought home. He called me out for being 5 minutes late, Mark would huff. "As if that makes a difference." And then he had the nerve to tell me how to talk to the clients. I'd been doing this job for years. I'd listen and nod, but inside I was growing frustrated. These seemed like normal workplace interactions to me, not the personal attacks Mark made them out to be. One day, Mark came home earlier than usual. I was in the middle of a conference call, but excused myself when I saw his face. "What's wrong?" I asked, muting my laptop. "I quit," he said simply. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You what?" I couldn't take it anymore. My boss made another comment about my attitude, and I just snapped. I told him where he could shove his job and walked out. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. "Mark, we have a mortgage. We can't afford for you to be unemployed right now." He waved off my concern. "I'll find something better." Something where I'm appreciated. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went back to my call. After Mark quit his job, our lives changed dramatically. I took on extra shifts and increased my workload, desperate to keep up with our mortgage payments and daily expenses. My days became a blur of meetings, sales calls, and late nights at the office. I was exhausted, but I didn't see any other choice. Meanwhile, Mark seemed to be in no hurry to find new employment. He'd occasionally mention an interview he'd been to, but there was always some reason it wasn't the right fit. The commute would be a nightmare, he'd say, or, the boss seemed like a real jerk. I tried to be patient, but my frustration grew with each passing day. One evening, I came home late to find Mark lounging on the couch, watching TV. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Have you eaten?" He looked up at me, frowning. "No, I was waiting for you to cook something." I stared at him in disbelief. "Mark, it's 9 p.m. I've been working since 7 this morning. Why didn't you make dinner?" "Because that's your job," he snapped. "You're never home anymore, Gina. The house is a mess, there's no food in the fridge, and I can't remember the last time we had a proper meal together." I felt my temper rising. My job? My job is keeping a roof over our heads and food on the table. "What exactly is your job right now, Mark?" "I'm looking for work," he shouted. "Do you think I enjoy sitting around all day? But I'm not going to settle for just any job. I deserve better than that." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I understand that, but we can't afford for you to be so picky right now. We have bills to pay." "Always about the money with you," he muttered. "What happened to supporting each other through thick and thin?" "I am supporting us," I said quietly. "But I need you to meet me halfway. Please, just try harder to find something. Anything. We can reassess once we're more stable." Mark didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, effectively ending the conversation. I went to bed hungry and angry that night, wondering how much longer I could keep this up. The next day, I met Lisa for coffee during my lunch break. She looked fresh and relaxed, her hair perfectly styled and her nails freshly manicured. "Gina, honey, you look exhausted," she said, concern in her voice. "Are you getting any sleep at all?" I sighed, sipping my double espresso. "Not much. Work's been crazy, and things at home are tense." Lisa reached out and patted my hand. "You're working too hard. You need to take care of yourself, relax a little. Tom always says a happy wife makes for a happy life." I bit back a retort. Lisa meant well, but she had no idea what my life was like. "It's not that simple for us right now," I said instead. "But I'm sure things will get better soon." As the weeks went by, the tension in our house grew thicker. Mark's job search seemed to be going nowhere, and I was stretching myself thin, trying to keep everything afloat. Our conversations, when we had them, were short and often ended in arguments. One evening, I came home to find Mark dressed up, ready to go out. "Where are you going?" I asked, surprised. "Out with the guys," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to play golf." "Golf? At this hour?" I was skeptical, but too tired to argue. "Whatever. Have fun." As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the mountain of work I'd brought home. The next day, I decided I needed a break. I took a rare day off from work and planned to surprise Mark with a weekend getaway. When I called to tell him, he seemed distracted. "This weekend? I can't. I've got plans with the guys again." I felt my heart sink. "Again? Can't you reschedule?" "No, it's important. Sorry, babe." He hung up before I could respond. Frustrated and hurt, I called Lisa. Maybe she and Tom would want to do something. "Oh, Gina," Lisa's voice was apologetic. "We'd love to, but Tom and I are visiting my parents this weekend." "Rain check?" I agreed, trying not to sound as disappointed as I felt. It seemed like everyone had plans except me. On a whim, I decided to go shopping. Maybe a little retail therapy would lift my spirits. As I was browsing through a department store, I heard a familiar voice. "Gina, what are you doing here?" I turned to see Tom, Lisa's husband, looking surprised and slightly uncomfortable. "Tom, I thought you and Lisa were visiting her parents this weekend?" His brow furrowed in confusion. "Her parents? No, we didn't have any plans. Lisa said she was spending the night at your place." My blood ran cold. "What? No, she's not with me. She told me you two were out of town." We found a quiet cafe and sat down. Tom looked grim as he spoke. "I've had suspicions for a while now," he said. "Lisa's been acting strange, always on her phone, making excuses to go out. I think our spouses might be having an affair." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't breathe. "No," I whispered. "They wouldn't." But even as I said it, pieces started falling into place. Mark's mysterious outings, Lisa's constant presence in our home, the way they looked at each other. Tom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm going to hire a private investigator. We need to know for sure. And we don't let on that we suspect anything. Can you do that, Gina?" I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. Yes, I can." As I drove home that evening, my mind was reeling. How had I not seen this coming? I walked into our house, half expecting to catch Mark and Lisa in the act. But the house was empty and quiet. Mark came home late, smelling of alcohol and mumbling about a great game of golf. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. I went through the motions of daily life, pretending everything was normal, while my insides churned with suspicion and dread. Mark continued his golf outings and job hunting charade, and I feigned belief in his increasingly transparent lies. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe in an hour." My heart raced as I made an excuse to leave work early. When I arrived at the cafe, Tom was already there, a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. He slid the envelope across to me without further ado. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to look through the contents. There were photographs, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and transcripts of text messages. It was all there in black and white, irrefutable evidence of Mark and Lisa's betrayal. "How long?" I managed to choke out. Tom's voice was flat. "At least 6 months, according to the investigator. Maybe longer." I felt like I might be sick. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of me working myself to the bone while Mark. "There's more," Tom said quietly. "Gina, you need to check your bank accounts. All of them." Confused, I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking app. What I saw made my blood run cold. My savings account, the one I'd been quietly building up for years as an emergency fund, was empty. With shaking fingers, I checked my credit card balance, which I had given Mark to pay for gasoline. Maxed out. "He's been funding their little adventure with your money," Tom said, his voice tight with anger. "Fancy dinners, hotel rooms, gifts for Lisa. All on your dime." The shock gave way to a fury I'd never experienced before. All those times I'd come home exhausted, all the extra hours I'd put in, all the sacrifices I'd made, and this is how Mark repaid me? "What are you going to do?" I asked Tom, my voice surprisingly steady. He leaned back, a cold smile on his face. "I'm going to divorce Lisa and take her for everything she's worth. And then some." He paused, looking at me intently. "The question is, what are you going to do, Gina?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing. "I want revenge," I said slowly. "But I want them to suffer. I want them to feel as humiliated and betrayed as I do right now." Tom nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that. I have an idea, but it's going to take some planning." Over the next hour, Tom and I hatched a plan. It was devious, it was cruel, and it was exactly what Mark and Lisa deserved. That night, when Mark came home, I greeted him with a smile. "Hey, honey," I said, kissing his cheek. "Listen, I was thinking, why don't we throw a party next weekend? To celebrate our friendship with Tom and Lisa. It's been a while since we all got together." Mark's eyes lit up. "Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm sure Lisa would love to help plan it." As I turned away, ostensibly to start dinner, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Mark and Lisa had no idea that their perfect little world was about to come crashing down around them. The week leading up to the party was a masterclass in deception. I threw myself into the preparations with a manic energy, playing the role of the perfect hostess. I called Lisa daily, discussing menu plans and decorations, all while picturing the look on her face when her world fell apart. The day of the party arrived, and our house was transformed. I had outdone myself with the decorations and food, determined that everything should be perfect for the grand finale. Guests started arriving in the early evening. I played the gracious host, making small talk and ensuring everyone's glasses were full. Tom arrived alone, explaining that Lisa would be there shortly. She was picking up a special dessert. When Lisa finally swept in, she was the picture of domestic perfection. Her hair was immaculate, her dress flattering, and in her arms was an elaborate cake. "Sorry I'm late," she trilled, air-kissing my cheek. I wanted everything to be just right. As the evening progressed, I watched Mark and Lisa carefully. To the casual observer, there was nothing untoward in their interactions. But now that I knew what to look for, their stolen glances and subtle touches were glaringly obvious. Finally, as the sky outside darkened, Tom stood up and clinked his glass for attention. "Everyone, if I could have your attention please," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Gina and I have prepared a little entertainment for you all. If you'd like to gather outside, we've set up a screen for an interesting film." There was a murmur of excitement as our guests filed out onto the back lawn. Mark looked at me, confused. "What's this about?" he asked. I smiled sweetly. "Oh, just a little trip down memory lane. Come on, you don't want to miss this." Outside, everyone settled onto blankets and chairs, facing the large screen we'd set up. Tom started the projector, and at first, it showed innocent scenes, the four of us on various outings, laughing and having fun. I saw Lisa relax, probably thinking this was just a sentimental slideshow. How wrong she was. Suddenly, the music changed, becoming darker, more ominous. The images on the screen shifted, showing Mark and Lisa in various compromising positions, leaving hotels together, kissing in a car, entering our house when I was at work. A collective gasp went up from the audience. I heard Lisa's mother let out a strangled cry. Mark jumped to his feet. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. I stood up slowly, my voice ice cold as I addressed the stunned crowd. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is what betrayal looks like." While Tom and I worked ourselves to the bone, our spouses were carrying on an affair behind our backs. Lisa was sobbing now, mascara running down her face. "Gina, please, I can explain." "Explain?" I cut her off. "Explain how you've been sleeping with my husband for months. Explain how you've been spending my hard-earned money on your little trysts." Tom stepped forward, his face grim. "Lisa, don't bother coming home. I've already changed the locks. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." The party dissolved into chaos. Guests were whispering furiously among themselves. Lisa's parents were berating her, her father's face purple with rage. As the shocked murmurs of the guests subsided, I steeled myself for what I knew I had to do next. I walked back into the house, retrieved the manila envelope from my desk drawer, and returned to the lawn. Mark was still standing there, looking shell-shocked and pale. I thrust the envelope into his hands. "Here are the divorce papers, Mark. I want you out of my house tonight, and I'll be demanding compensation from both you and Lisa for your betrayal." Mark fumbled with the envelope, his hands shaking. "Gina, please, we can talk about this. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," I cut him off coldly. "You've said enough with your actions. Now leave." He stood there, divorce papers in hand, looking as if he'd been slapped. Guests were approaching me, offering sympathetic words and support. In the middle of the lawn, Lisa had sunk to her knees, mascara running down her face as she pleaded with Tom. "Please, Tom, don't divorce me. I made a mistake. We can work through this." To my surprise, Mark rushed over to Lisa. He grabbed her arm and hissed, "Get up. Don't humiliate yourself like this. We can start over, make a new life together." Lisa's tear-streaked face contorted with fury. She yanked her arm away from Mark and spat, "Start over? With you? I don't need an unemployed man who can only pay compliments. I need someone who can actually support me." As the last of the guests trickled out, offering final words of support, Tom approached me. His face was a mask of controlled anger, but his voice was gentle when he spoke to me. "Gina, if you need any help, legal, financial, anything, please don't hesitate to call me. We're in this together, okay?" I nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Tom. The same goes for you." As Tom left, I turned to Mark, who was standing alone, looking lost. "I want you gone by morning. Leave your keys on the kitchen counter." I turned my back on him and walked into the house, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the window, I watched as he slowly made his way down the driveway and out of sight. The house felt eerily quiet after the chaos of the evening. I sank onto the couch, emotionally and physically exhausted. Tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. I was sad, yes, mourning the death of my marriage and what I thought was a close friendship. But underlying that sadness was a sense of calm, even relief. For months, I had been carrying the weight of an unemployed, dissatisfied husband. I had worked myself to the bone, trying to keep our life afloat while he contributed nothing but complaints. Now, that burden was lifted. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. In the weeks following the explosive revelation at the party, life took on a new rhythm. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the familiar routine of sales reports and client meetings. But unlike before, I made sure to maintain a healthier balance, reducing my overtime and actually using my vacation days. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Tom. He looked tired but determined. "Gina," he greeted me with a nod. "How are you holding up?" I managed a small smile. "I'm doing okay. How about you? Any news?" Tom's face hardened. "The divorce is final. I kicked Lisa out of the house last week." I wasn't surprised, but I still felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but a sense of shared experience. "How did she take it?" He shrugged. "Not well. Apparently, her parents meant what they said at the party. They refused to take her in or help her financially." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? That seems harsh." "They're old-fashioned. Adultery is a big deal to them." Tom sighed. "Last I heard, she's working as a sales clerk at some department store downtown." The irony wasn't lost on me. Lisa, who had always looked down on my career, was now forced to work a job she would have considered beneath her. "What goes around comes around, I suppose," I murmured. Tom nodded grimly. "How are things with Mark?" I rolled my eyes. "He won't stop calling and texting. Keeps begging for another chance. But I feel nothing. The love, the trust, it's all gone. I can't imagine ever wanting to be with him again." We parted ways, and as I drove home, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The next day, I met with my lawyer to discuss the progress of my own divorce proceedings. She greeted me with a triumphant smile. "Good news, Gina. The judge has reviewed the evidence, including the detective's report, and has ruled in our favor on all counts." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," my lawyer said, "that Mark has been ordered to pay you substantial compensation for his infidelity. Moreover, he's required to repay every cent he took from your reserve account and credit card for his affair with Lisa." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. With the compensation and repayment from Mark, I was able to pay off the remainder of my mortgage in one fell swoop. The house was now truly, fully mine. That evening, as I was celebrating my newfound financial freedom with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed. It was Mark, again. "Gina, please," his message read. "I know I messed up. But I love you. Can't we try to work things out? I'll do anything." I stared at the message for a long moment. Once, those words might have moved me. Now, they just left me cold. I typed out a response. "Mark, stop contacting me. It's over. I don't love you anymore, and I don't want to try again. Please respect my decision and leave me alone." I hit send and then blocked his number. It felt final, decisive. And it felt good. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, that I was content with my newfound independence, fate threw me another curveball. It started innocently enough. Tom and I had been in regular contact since our respective divorces, offering each other support and companionship during this challenging time. One evening, about 2 months after my divorce was finalized, Tom called me. "Hey Gina," he said, his voice warm. "I was thinking. We've both been through hell lately. How about we celebrate our new beginnings? I could bring over a bottle of wine, and we could toast to our freedom." I hesitated for a moment, but then thought, why not? "Sure, Tom. That sounds nice. Come over around 8? When Tom arrived, bottle of expensive red wine in hand, I was struck by how different he looked. Gone was the stressed, angry man I'd seen at the fateful party. He seemed lighter, more relaxed. He'd even gotten a haircut that suited him well. We settled on my patio, the warm summer evening wrapping around us like a comfortable blanket. As we sipped our wine, our conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of shared understanding. "You know," Tom said, refilling our glasses, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually grateful for what happened. It opened my eyes to so much." I nodded, understanding completely. "I know what you mean. It's like, we're finally free to be ourselves." As the night wore on and the wine bottle emptied, I found myself noticing things about Tom I'd never paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle timbre of his laugh, the strength in his hands as he gestured while talking. I'm not sure who made the first move. One moment we were laughing about some shared memory, and the next, we were kissing. That night, Tom and I crossed a line we'd never even considered before. When morning came, I woke up to find Tom already awake, watching me with a mixture of affection and uncertainty. "Gina," he said softly, "about last night. Last night was unexpected, but it felt right. Maybe we could date? Take things slow, see where this leads?" I found myself nodding, a smile spreading across my face. "I'd like that, Tom." Over the next few weeks, Tom and I embarked on a new journey together. We went on proper dates, dinners, movies, long walks in the park. To my surprise, Tom revealed a romantic side I'd never seen before. He brought me flowers, left sweet notes for me to find, and always seemed to know just what to say to make me smile. "You know," I said to Tom one evening as we cuddled on my couch, "I never would have predicted this." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Life's full of surprises, isn't it? But I have to say, this is one surprise I'm very grateful for." As I snuggled closer to him, I found myself agreeing wholeheartedly. We weren't looking too far into the future yet, both of us knew the importance of living in the present. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about what that future might hold. My name is Veronica, and at 59, I thought I had it all figured out. A successful career, a thriving business, and a marriage that had weathered 3 decades. I met Robert when I was 27. He was a brilliant plastic surgeon with dreams of opening his own clinic. I was a business graduate with a knack for management. We clicked instantly, our ambitions aligning perfectly. Within a year, we were married and working towards our shared goal. Over the next few years, we poured our hearts and souls into establishing our clinic. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. Robert's skill as a surgeon and my business acumen proved to be a winning combination. Slowly but surely, our reputation grew. There was only one cloud on our horizon: children. Or rather, the lack of them. After 2 years of trying, we discovered Robert had fertility issues. The news hit him hard. "I'm sorry, Veronica," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know how much you wanted kids." I hugged him tight. "It's okay, Robert. We have each other, and we have our clinic. That's enough." But was it? There were times when I'd see mothers with their children and feel a pang of regret. I pushed those feelings aside, focusing instead on our growing business. As the years passed, our clinic became one of the most respected in the city. Then, about 6 months ago, I noticed something was off with Robert. His hands, those skilled hands that had transformed countless lives, were starting to shake. "Robert," I said one evening as we were going over some paperwork, "I think you should see a doctor." He brushed me off. "It's just fatigue, Veronica. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." But it wasn't just fatigue. The tremors were becoming more frequent, more noticeable. I urged him to get checked out, to consider stepping back from surgeries and focus on administrative work. He wouldn't hear of it. Despite my concerns about Robert's health, we continued to push forward with our plans for the clinic. We needed to upgrade our equipment, expand our services. It would require a significant investment, more than we could manage on our own. That's when I started reaching out to potential investors. It was a long process, filled with meetings, presentations, and negotiations. But finally, after months of work, we had a deal. The day the funds hit our account, I felt a surge of triumph. This was it, the next big step for our clinic. I decided to surprise Robert with the news over lunch. I ordered his favorites from that little Italian place down the street and set everything up in my office. The door opened, and Robert walked in. He looked tired, but his eyes lit up when he saw the spread. "What's all this?" he asked, a smile playing on his lips. I grinned back. "I have some news. The investors came through. The money's in our account. We can order that new equipment we'd been eyeing." For a moment, Robert's face lit up with the boyish enthusiasm I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. He swept me into a hug, laughing. "That's fantastic, Veronica. You're amazing, you know that?" I basked in his praise, feeling like we were back on solid ground. Then he pulled back, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I have a surprise for you too," he said. "I want you to meet someone." I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "Oh, a new client?" He shook his head, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Not exactly. She's our new nurse." Before I could process this information, the door swung open, and in walked a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 22, with long blonde hair, pouty lips, and a figure that screamed recent work done. She flashed a dazzling smile at Robert before turning her gaze to me. "Hi, I'm Ella," she chirped, her voice syrupy sweet. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson." I blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, but I don't recall us hiring a new nurse. Especially one so young." Robert cleared his throat. "Well, that's the surprise. Ella here is eager to join our team. She's just completed her nursing courses." "Courses?" I echoed, my eyes narrowing. "Not a full nursing degree?" Ella's smile faltered slightly. "Well, not yet. But I'm a quick learner. And Dr. Henderson says he'll teach me everything I need to know." I turned to Robert, disbelief etched on my face. "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" We stepped out into the hallway, leaving Ella in my office. As soon as the door closed, I rounded on Robert. "What the hell are you thinking?" I hissed. We can't hire someone with no experience, especially not in a medical setting. Robert had the decency to look sheepish. Look, I know it's unorthodox, but Ella is bright and eager to learn. She was a patient of mine, breast augmentation, and she was so impressed with our work that she wanted to be part of it. I felt my blood pressure rising. Robert, this is a professional medical facility, not a fan club. We can't just hire someone because they like their boob job. His face hardened. Keep your voice down. I've made my decision. Ella starts next week. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. If you hire her, I won't work with her. It's me or her, Robert. I expected him to back down, to realize how ridiculous this whole situation was. Instead, his next words hit me like a slap in the face. Then I guess you should pack your things, Veronica. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 32 years of marriage, of building a life and a business together, and he was choosing this girl over me? Without another word, I turned and walked back into my office. Ella was still there, examining her reflection in the window. Well, I said, my voice tight. It seems congratulations are in order. The job is yours. I grabbed my purse and coat. As I walked out of the clinic, I could feel their eyes on me, Robert's conflicted, Ella's triumphant. I held my head high, refusing to let them see how shaken I was. The days following my confrontation with Robert at the clinic dragged on endlessly. Surely, I thought, Robert would come to his senses. He'd realize he needed me, not just as his wife, but as the backbone of our business. But a week passed, and still no word from Robert. I was beginning to wonder if I should reach out again when my phone rang. It was Sarah, an old friend who frequented the same social circles as Robert and me. Veronica? It's Sarah. I'm not sure how to say this, but, do you know your husband is getting married? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? Sarah, what are you talking about? Sarah's voice was hesitant, laden with discomfort. I saw Robert yesterday. He was at Bella's bridal with a young woman. They were choosing a wedding dress. The conversation that followed was a blur. I thanked Sarah mechanically and hung up, my mind reeling. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys and headed for the clinic. I marched straight to Robert's office, not bothering to knock. He looked up as I entered, a smug smile playing on his lips. Veronica, I suppose we should discuss the details. Ella and I are getting married. She's pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the chair opposite him, struggling to breathe. Pregnant? But, how? You're... Not anymore, apparently, he said with a chuckle. Ella's been giving me some special supplements. Seems they've done the trick. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face. In that moment, I realized that the man I'd loved for over 3 decades was gone. This person before me was someone else entirely. I've had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers, Robert continued, sliding a folder across the desk. I think you'll find the terms quite generous. Numbly, I opened the folder and scanned the documents. Despite the turmoil in my heart, my business mind kicked in, analyzing the terms. He was offering me our house, the apartment we rented out, substantial financial compensation, and alimony. In exchange, he would retain full ownership of the clinic and our other business assets. With a steady hand that belied my inner turmoil, I signed the papers. As I stood to leave, a final concern nagged at me. Robert, your health. The tremors in your hands. You really should see a doctor. Maybe consider stepping back from surgeries for a while. He laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. Oh, Veronica. Always the worrier. I'm fine. I feel young again, successful. Unlike some of us who are clearly ready for retirement. The days following the divorce settlement stretched out before me like an endless, empty road. For the first time in decades, I found myself without purpose, without a job to pour my energy into. The silence of my house was deafening. Initially, I tried to fill the void by visiting friends. But as I sat in their living rooms, nursing cups of tea that had long gone cold, I realized my mistake. These were our friends, mine and Robert's. Every conversation inevitably circled back to the upcoming wedding. I heard the bride's dress is being flown in from Paris. Can you imagine? One would say, voice hushed as if imparting a great secret. Then would come the sympathetic looks, the gentle pats on my hand. Oh, but how are you holding up, dear? It must be so difficult. Their words, meant to comfort, felt like sandpaper against my raw emotions. The pitying smiles, the understanding nods, it was all too much. Gradually, I began to withdraw, declining invitations and screening calls. Alone in the house that now felt too big for just me, I found myself wandering from room to room, touching familiar objects that now seemed to belong to another life. In the study, my eyes fell on an old easel tucked away in the corner, gathering dust. Painting. I used to love it, before the clinic consumed all my time and energy. On a whim, I pulled out the easel, found some old canvases and paints, and set up by the large bay window in the living room. 2 months slipped by in this fashion. I was by no means healed, but I was coping. Then came the call that would change everything once again. Ms. Henderson? This is Dr. Emily Chen from Radiant Transformations Clinic. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I recognized the name. Radiant Transformations was Robert's main competitor in the city. Not at all, Dr. Chen. How can I help you? There was a slight pause. Well, Ms. Henderson, we've heard some rumors. Is it true that you're no longer working at Henderson Plastic Surgery? And that you and Dr. Henderson have separated? I took a deep breath. Yes, that's correct. We're divorced, actually. I see. Dr. Chen's voice was carefully neutral. In that case, Ms. Henderson, I have a proposition for you. We've always admired your work in practice management. Would you be interested in joining our team here at Radiant Transformations? The offer took me by surprise. For a moment, I was speechless. Then, a slow smile spread across my face. I would be very interested, Dr. Chen. When would you like to meet to discuss details? The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Meetings, paperwork, getting to know my new team. For the first time in months, I felt alive again, energized. It was during this busy period that I happened to catch a news segment one evening. There, splashed across my TV screen, were photos of Robert and Ella, sun-kissed and smiling on a beach in the Maldives. The ticker at the bottom of the screen proclaimed, "Local plastic surgeon weds in lavish Maldives ceremony." I expected the sight to hurt, to reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. Instead, I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, not even resentment. Just a vague sense of pity for the man who had thrown away decades of partnership for a fleeting infatuation. A month had passed. Life at Radiant Transformations was going well, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Is this Veronica? A young, slightly shrill voice came through the speaker. It took me a moment to place it. Ella? I said, disbelief coloring my tone. What do you want? It's Robert, she said, her voice trembling. He's in trouble. A surgery went wrong. A facelift for some big shot's wife. Her face, it's all messed up. Her husband is threatening to sue us, to ruin the clinic. You have to come and fix this. The audacity of her request left me momentarily speechless. When I found my voice, it was cold and firm. I don't have to do anything, Ella. I don't work there anymore, remember? But you always handled this stuff, she whined. Robert needs you. I took a deep breath, tamping down my anger. I warned Robert about his tremors. I told him to see a doctor, to stop performing surgeries. It was clear he was developing symptoms of Parkinson's disease. But he wouldn't listen. Parkinson's? Ella scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. You're just a jealous old woman who can't stand to see Robert happy and successful." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, a mixture of emotions swirling within me. Concern for the patient, anger at Ella's words, and a grim satisfaction at being proven right about Robert's condition. Shaking my head, I turned back to my work. Whatever mess Robert had gotten himself into, it wasn't my problem anymore. A week later, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized all too well. "Veronica?" Robert's voice sounded strained, desperate. "I need your help." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "It's the clinic reports," he said. "I can't make sense of them. You've always handled this stuff. Could you come in and take a look?" Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to tell him that his problems were no longer my concern. But another part, the part that had built that clinic from the ground up, couldn't bear the thought of it falling apart. "Fine," I said curtly. "I'll be there in an hour." Robert looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a pallor to his skin that spoke of sleepless nights. But what caught my attention were his hands, trembling visibly as he shuffled papers on his desk. As I pored over the documents, a grim picture began to emerge. The clinic's finances were in disarray. But more alarmingly, there was a glaring discrepancy in the accounts. "Robert," I said slowly, looking up at him. "What happened to the money from the investors? The funds for the new equipment?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. I had to use it for other things." "Other things?" I pressed, my voice hardening. "Like your wedding? My divorce settlement?" Robert's face crumpled. I thought I could make it back quickly. If I just did a few more high-profile surgeries. "Like the one that went wrong?" I said, the pieces falling into place. "Robert, this is serious. This is misuse of funds. The investors could sue you for this." "I know," he exploded, his trembling hands sending papers flying. "And now with this botched surgery. Veronica, I'm ruined. They're going to take everything." As I stood there, reports in hand, the office door swung open. Ella sauntered in, her face a mask of haughty disdain that faltered slightly when she saw me. My eyes instinctively dropped to her midsection, and I frowned. "Weren't you supposed to be pregnant?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. "You're not showing at all for someone who should be, 4 months along now?" Ella's cheeks flushed, and she unconsciously placed a hand over her flat stomach. It's just not visible yet," she stammered unconvincingly. Ignoring her weak excuse, I turned to Robert. "What exactly were those fertility treatments you mentioned? The ones that miraculously cured your infertility?" Robert, looking increasingly uncomfortable, gestured vaguely towards Ella. "She's been giving them to me. Some kind of herbal supplement, I think." I raised an eyebrow at Ella. "Well, care to enlighten us?" Reluctantly, Ella reached into her designer purse and pulled out a small pill bottle. She handed it to me, avoiding eye contact. As soon as I read the label, I couldn't help but laugh. "Robert," I said, shaking my head, "these aren't fertility drugs. They're just run-of-the-mill erectile dysfunction pills. They don't have any effect on actual fertility." Robert's face paled, his eyes darting between me and Ella. But she said. "She lied," I said flatly. Then, a more serious thought occurred to me. "Robert, you shouldn't be taking these, especially not with your condition. They can exacerbate the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. They might even be speeding up its progression." The color drained from Robert's face as the implications of my words sank in. He opened his mouth, likely to berate Ella, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was his lawyer. Robert answered, his voice shaky. "Hello? Yes, this is Dr. Henderson." As he listened, I watched the last vestiges of color leave his face. His free hand, already trembling, began to shake so violently that he had to set it on the desk to steady it. I see," he said weakly. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for letting me know. He ended the call and sat there, staring blankly at the phone in his hand. Robert? I prompted after a moment of heavy silence. What is it? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation that I'd never seen before. It's the investors, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They want to conduct a full audit of the clinic. They're specifically interested in how their funds for the new equipment were spent. The silence that followed the lawyer's call was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in Robert's head as he desperately searched for a way out of this mess. Suddenly, he looked up at me, his eyes wild with desperation. Veronica, he said, his voice trembling. I need your help. The house, or the apartment, could you sign them over to me? I could sell them, pay back the investors, and save the clinic. I stared at him, incredulous. Are you serious, Robert? You want me to give you the only things I have left after our divorce? Please, he begged, his facade of confidence completely shattered. If you don't help me, I'll lose everything. The clinic, my reputation. I'll have nothing left. I felt a surge of anger rising within me. And whose fault is that, Robert? You're the one who cheated. You're the one who threw away 32 years of marriage for a pretty young thing who batted her eyelashes at you. You made your bed, now lie in it. Ella, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up. Wait a minute, she said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Robert. Are you saying you're broke? That there's no money left? Robert turned to her, desperation evident in every line of his face. It's just temporary, sweetheart. We'll get through this together, raise our baby. Ella's laugh cut through his words like a knife. It was a cold, contemptuous sound that made even me flinch. Baby, she sneered. There is no baby, you fool. I made it all up. I thought you were loaded, that I'd be set for life. But you're just a washed-up old man who can't even keep his own clinic afloat. Robert staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. But you said. I lied, Ella said bluntly. And now, I want a divorce. I'll be taking half of everything, including this precious clinic of yours. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Both Robert and Ella turned to look at me, shocked by my outburst. Oh, honey, I said, shaking my head at Ella. The only thing you two will be sharing is debt and legal fees. There's nothing left to take. Robert slumped into his chair, looking utterly defeated. Ella's face contorted with rage as the reality of the situation sank in. I'd seen enough. Without another word, I gathered my things and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear Ella's shrill voice rising in anger, Robert's pleading responses, but I didn't look back. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen at Radiant Transformations. There was a new project she wanted my input on, something that could potentially revolutionize our approach to patient care. Weeks passed, and I threw myself into my work at Radiant Transformations. The new project was challenging and rewarding, allowing me to apply my years of experience in innovative ways. I was so engrossed in my new life that I barely thought about Robert or the old clinic anymore. Then one evening, as I was unwinding with a glass of wine and the evening news, a familiar name caught my attention. The renowned plastic surgeon Dr. Robert Henderson has been sued for medical negligence and deliberate concealment of illness, the anchor announced. I sat up straighter, my wine forgotten as I listened intently. The story unfolded like a tragic play. Robert had been forced to pay substantial financial compensation to the patient whose facelift he had botched. Worse still, the medical board had revoked his license to practice, citing his failure to disclose his Parkinson's diagnosis as a grave breach of professional ethics. As the days went by, more news trickled in. The once prestigious Henderson Plastic Surgery Clinic was hemorrhaging clients. Its reputation, built over decades of hard work, was in tatters. Then came the final blow. The investors, upon discovering the misuse of their funds, sued the clinic. Robert, drowning in debt and legal troubles, had no choice but to sell the clinic to pay off his debts and settle the claims against him. I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness for the downfall of something I had helped build, anger at Robert's recklessness, and a strange sense of vindication. But mostly, I felt relief that I was no longer entangled in that mess. A few days later, Dr. Chen called me into her office. Her expression was unreadable as I took a seat across from her. "Veronica," she began, "I have some news that might interest you. Radiant Transformations has just acquired a new property." I raised an eyebrow, curious. "Oh?" She smiled. "We've purchased the Henderson Plastic Surgery Clinic." For a moment, I was speechless. Of all the potential buyers, I never imagined it would be Radiant Transformations. "I see," I managed to say. "That's unexpected." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes twinkling. "Here's the thing, Veronica. We need someone to manage this new acquisition. Someone who knows the ins and outs of the place, who can turn it around and restore its reputation. Someone like you." I blinked, taken aback. "Me? But You built that clinic from the ground up," Dr. Chen said softly. "Who better to breathe new life into it?" As her words sank in, I felt a surge of emotions. Fear, excitement, nostalgia, determination, they all swirled within me. But above all, I felt a sense of coming full circle. "I'd be honored," I heard myself say. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Walking back into the clinic that had been my second home for so many years was surreal. There were new challenges, of course, rebuilding the clinic's reputation, reassuring old clients, and integrating with Radiant Transformation systems. But with each passing day, I felt more and more in my element. One evening, as I was locking up the clinic, I paused to look at the new sign above the door. "Radiant Transformations at Henderson," it read. A perfect blend of old and new, just like me. As I drove home, I couldn't help but marvel at the twists and turns my life had taken. A year ago, I had been cast aside, feeling lost and betrayed. Now, I was back where I belonged, stronger and wiser for the experience. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend, inviting me to join a group for a painting class over the weekend. I smiled, realizing I now had the time and freedom to pursue such pleasures. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in a long while. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a deep sense of contentment wash over me. My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down, not once, but twice. I guess I should start at the beginning. I was born to loving parents, Mark and Lisa Smith, in a small suburban town. Dad was a journalist, and Mom worked as a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Life was pretty normal until I turned 12. That's when everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and my parents were driving home from a dinner party. I was at home with my grandma, watching some silly cartoon when the phone rang. I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I heard my grandma's muffled sobs from the kitchen. The next few days were a blur. Mom died on impact, they told us. Dad survived, but barely. When I finally got to see him in the hospital, he was a shell of the man I knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctors said he'd never walk again. "Chloe," he croaked, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault some drunk driver had plowed into their car. But as I grew older, I realized he was sorry for what our lives had become, for the struggles we'd face, for the mother I'd lost, for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Mark Smith, was made of stronger stuff than he gave himself credit for. Once he was out of the hospital and settled into his wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He'd always been a talented writer, and now he channeled all his energy into his job as an editor at the city's major newspaper. As I entered my teens, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, to make friends, to have as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We'd watch old movies together, argue about books, and he'd help me with my homework. When it came time for college, Dad insisted I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." I was hesitant, but I knew he was right. So off I went to State University, majoring in accounting. It was there that I met Jessica, who would become my best friend. And through Jessica, I met her second cousin, Michael. Michael was kind, funny, and he didn't bat an eye when I told him about my dad. In fact, the first time he met Dad, they hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of classic rock. "Your old man's cool," Michael told me later. "And you're pretty amazing for taking care of him all these years." I shrugged it off, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. A life with love, laughter, and yes, even a family of my own someday. After graduation, life seemed to fall into place like pieces of a puzzle. I landed a job at the local tax service, and Michael started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 2 years before he popped the question on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was over the moon, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Michael. But I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Michael's face broke into a wide grin. "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the 3 of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As I stood there, hand in hand with Michael, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Karen, and sister-in-law, Emily. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. "So, your father is handicapped?" Karen had asked during our first meeting, her nose wrinkling as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But he works as an editor, Anne." "How nice," she interrupted, clearly uninterested. "Michael, darling, are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face burn with anger and shame. Michael, bless him, immediately jumped to my defense. "Mom, Chloe is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Karen up, but I could see the disapproval lingering in her eyes. Emily, taking cues from her mother, was equally cold towards me. After the wedding, true to his word, Michael moved in with Dad and me. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office, Michael would be on the road for days at a time, and when he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Karen and Emily visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They'd strut around like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once, I overheard Karen muttering to Emily, "It's a shame. Michael could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious, but I bit my tongue. For Michael's sake, I tried to keep the peace. But it was getting harder and harder. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Karen and Emily, I broke down in tears. Michael found me in our bedroom, sobbing. Hey, he said, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "Your mom and sister," I hiccuped. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Michael's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Karen and Emily. As the months passed, Michael's trucking business began to flourish. He was always on the road, crisscrossing the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I threw myself into my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Michael called. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Chloe, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden. Something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I warmed to the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted. "And it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Michael's income and mine, plus the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in, making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, soaking up the sun and fresh air. It was idyllic. Then came the housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Karen and Emily. The party was in full swing when they arrived, fashionably late as usual. They sauntered in, eyeing everything with barely concealed envy. As we moved through the house, I could see the wheels turning in Karen's head. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Chloe," she said, her voice low. "This would be perfect for Michael and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't look so shocked," Karen continued. "Your father isn't, well, he's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could respond, Karen marched out to the patio where Dad was chatting with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him towards the driveway. "Karen!" I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors?" I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Michael had heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he bellowed. "What the hell are you doing? Let go of Mark's chair right now." Karen looked shocked at Michael's tone. "But honey, I was just—" "I don't want to hear it," Michael cut her off. "You and Emily need to leave. Now." After they left, Michael apologized profusely to Dad and me. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I had no idea she would. I'm just so sorry." Dad reached out and patted Michael's hand. "It's not your fault, son. Some people, they just can't understand." Life settled into a new rhythm after the housewarming incident. Karen and Emily kept their distance, which suited me just fine. Michael threw himself into his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help cover our new mortgage. I split my time between my job at the tax office and tending to our home and Dad. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. Michael was on the road more often than not, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. An unfamiliar male voice greeted me. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Yes?" I managed to squeak out. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Michael Thompson, has been in a serious accident." The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and "didn't make it" floated around me, but I couldn't process them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that reality began to sink in. Michael was gone. The next week was a haze of grief and disbelief. I moved through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely able to comprehend what was happening. The day before the funeral, I steeled myself and called Karen. I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from some impersonal newspaper obituary. "Hello?" Karen's sharp voice answered. "Karen, it's Chloe," I said, my voice trembling. It's about Michael. He's gone. There was an accident." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, to my shock, Karen's voice came back, dripping with venom. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You forced him to work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son." I was stunned. "Karen, that's not." "Save it," she snapped. "I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy. But don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed, now lie in it." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? The day of Michael's funeral dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. The church was packed. Michael had been well liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had turned out to pay their respects. After the service, as people filed past to offer their condolences, I was struck by the absence of Michael's mother and sister. They hadn't even bothered to show up to their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand. "Their loss, sweetie. We're family, and we'll get through this together." As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange, because I was sure I'd turned everything off before we left. "Did you leave any lights on, Dad?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I could see movement inside the house. My heart started racing. Were we being robbed? On the day of Michael's funeral, no less? I helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. My blood ran cold as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Karen and Emily in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Karen turned to me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Oh, Chloe, dear. We're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Michael's gone." I was speechless. Emily chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry, you can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel the rage building inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Karen had the audacity to look offended. "This house belongs to us now. All of Michael's property does. We're his real family, after all." "Like hell you are," I exploded. "Where were you today?" "At his funeral?" "Oh, that's right, you couldn't be bothered to show up." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "We were busy making arrangements. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We'll need you out by tomorrow." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Michael, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home? "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Karen and Emily exchanged worried glances. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. "Now, Chloe," Karen began, but I cut her off. "No. You have exactly 5 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Michael and I bought it together. You have no right to be here." Maybe it was the steel in my voice, or the fire in my eyes, but Karen and Emily finally seemed to realize they'd gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Karen turned to me with a sneer. "This isn't over, Chloe. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." The days following Michael's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Michael's affairs, partly to keep busy and partly out of fear that Karen and Emily would try to swoop in and take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart raced as I answered, fearing it was Karen making good on her threat of legal action. "Mrs. Thompson," a crisp, professional voice asked. "This is James Anderson from Anderson and Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will." I felt a glimmer of hope. His will? I didn't know he had one. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thompson came to see us about 6 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing." I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind reeling. Why hadn't Michael told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Anderson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Smith, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for us to settle near his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Anderson opened a file on his desk. "Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. Anderson began to read. "I, Michael Thompson, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Chloe Thompson." I gasped. Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Anderson continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Chloe use these resources to care for herself and her father, Mark Smith, whom I have come to love as my own." Tears were streaming down my face now. Even from beyond the grave, Michael was taking care of us. "There's more," Mr. Anderson said gently. "Mr. Thompson left a letter for you." He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. "My dearest Chloe. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Mark. Please know that you two were the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Mark were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Chloe. You and Mark. Not them. Take care of each other. Live your lives to the fullest. And know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Michael." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Anderson gave us a moment before speaking again. "Mrs. Thompson, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy." I looked up, sniffling. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mr. Anderson said with a small smile, "that you'll be receiving a substantial sum. Enough to pay off your mortgage and then some." As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Michael had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sleek sedan. "Oh no," I muttered. "What now?" Sure enough, Karen and Emily were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Michael's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. "Chloe," Karen began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet. "We need to talk about Michael's estate." I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. "No, Karen. We don't. Michael left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And do you want to know why? Because we were his real family. Not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property." For once, Karen was speechless. Emily tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. The weeks following our meeting with the lawyer were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into settling Michael's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and true to Mr. Anderson's word, it was enough to pay off our mortgage, with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Michael's desk, I came across a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and found pages filled with his messy scrawl. It was a journal of sorts, filled with his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids, one entry read, "Want to make sure they have the best start in life." My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Michael's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, clutching the notebook to my chest. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Michael. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. "It's okay, Chloe," he said in my dream. "Everything's going to be all right." I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom in time. But as the days went by, the morning sickness persisted. At first, I chalked it up to stress and grief. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered another possibility. Finally, after a week of this, I found myself standing in the pharmacy aisle, staring at pregnancy tests. With trembling hands, I bought one and hurried home. The 3 minutes I waited for the result were the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, I saw 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, a mix of emotions overwhelming me. Joy, fear, grief, hope, they all swirled together in a dizzying cocktail. "Chloe?" Dad's voice came through the door. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression immediately changed from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad." I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Chloe. And this baby is a gift. A piece of Michael that will live on." His words struck a chord in me. This baby was a part of Michael, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to recede, replaced by a fierce determination. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift. And we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's my girl. Now, let's get you something to eat. You're eating for 2 now, after all." As we made our way to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope blooming in my chest. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging. But with my father by my side and Michael's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the 2 of us, eagerly anticipating the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sedan. What could they possibly want now? I made my way to the front of the house, one hand instinctively cradling my swollen belly. Karen and Emily stood on our porch, looking uncomfortable and slightly desperate. "Chloe," Karen began, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. We need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Emily chimed in, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment. Just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put us through, they had the audacity to ask for more? "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm but calm. "That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore." Karen's eyes narrowed as they fell on my pregnant belly. Her face contorted with a mix of shock and disgust. You're pregnant?" she spat. "Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Michael's body isn't even cold in the ground." I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. I didn't make excuses and say that it was Michael's child. I didn't want my baby to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled, a small, secretive smile that seemed to unnerve Karen even more. "My personal life is none of your concern," I said calmly. "Now, I think it's time for you to leave." Karen looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Emily's arm. I watched as they drove away, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and maintained my dignity. Michael would have been proud.